Story number 1. If June hadn't been there that morning, I might have opened that door. She wasn't just a dog. She was a survivor, scarred, silent, and strangely aware of the evil that crept near. You know how sometimes your gut screams at you? That morning, it wasn't my gut. It was her growl. The house was locked. The alarms were off. And 3 men stood on the other side of my bedroom door. People say pit bulls are dangerous. That day, mine saved my life. I had never planned to spend a summer alone with a dog I didn't know. But that's exactly how it happened. My best friend left town for the summer and let me sublease her room in a college house. One of those typical 4-bedroom setups built for students. All copy-paste architecture, soulless but cheap. The other girls who lived there had gone home too. So for 2 months, it was just me. And June came from a friend's younger sister. She was a last-minute addition, a rescue pit bull with scars etched into her skin and muscle packed beneath every inch of her frame. I didn't ask too many questions. Maybe I should have. The first thing I noticed about her wasn't the size, though she was a tank. It was her eyes, sharp, watchful, too knowing. I made her a bed in the corner of the room, filled it with soft blankets and toys, trying to show her she was safe now. But when I turned in that first night, she jumped straight onto my mattress, curled against me, and stared, her teeth inches from my face. I barely slept. The second night, she did it again. I woke up and she was locked onto me with that same intense gaze, like she was still trying to decide if I was worth trusting. By night 3, something changed. I shared my leftover pizza crust with her. She licked my hand. I scratched her belly for the first time, and she let me. For the first time, she wagged her tail. She was opening up, and I felt oddly safe with her beside me. It was 6:37 a.m. Boy, I remember that number because I looked at my phone, annoyed that I was awake. I never woke up that early. I was a college student on summer break. But something pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it, not barking, not growling, snarling, low, guttural, unrelenting. I sat up instantly. June was no longer beside me. She was facing the bedroom door, shoulders stiff, lips curled, teeth bared, and she was lunging, slamming her body into the door, teeth snapping inches from the knob. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. Someone was on the other side of the door. I heard the soft clink of the knob turning again and again. I had dead-bolted that door. I reached beneath the bed and pulled out the old 12-gauge my dad insisted I keep when I moved to Texas. I racked it once, loud, unmistakable, and then silence. "Who's there?" I asked her. A voice replied, shaky, too casual. Maintenance? We're maintenance. We're just here to fix the dishwasher." The dishwasher was downstairs. I hadn't called for any repairs. I held the gun steady. "You didn't knock," I said. "Sorry," another voice said. We were told no one was home." June snarled louder. I cracked the door an inch. See, what I saw in that tiny sliver chilled me more than the cold steel in my hand. 3 men, no uniforms, no tools, no identification, just standing there, unshowered, clothes clean, but bodies dirty. One looked barely older than me. The others, maybe 40. Greasy hair, tired eyes, sun-scorched skin, like they'd been sleeping outside. They didn't expect me to be armed. They didn't expect the beast growling behind the door. "I'm calling the office," I told them. "Leave now." They didn't argue. They just left. Quickly, silently, vanishing down the hallway like shadows. Once they were gone, I ran to the back door. It was unlocked. I always double-checked the locks. Always. Something was wrong, man. I waited by the front door with the shotgun across my lap until 8 Mark A.M. When the leasing office opened, my hand shook as I dialed. "Hi, this is Unit 8. Did you send maintenance over this morning?" A pause. "No," the woman replied. "Why? Is something wrong?" I described the men, the door. June's reaction, the woman's tone shifted fast. "We didn't send anyone, and no one should be accessing units without prior notice." That confirmed it. They weren't maintenance. They weren't supposed to be there. I filed a report, but that was it. I never heard what happened after. Whether they were caught, whether they tried again somewhere else. A week later, I heard a rumor. In that housing complex, the one filled with students and low security, 5 women had been attacked in the weeks leading up to my incident. Some were stalked. One was assaulted. Another woke up to a man standing at her bed. June had saved me from being number 6. She hadn't growled out of fear. She'd sensed something, someone. Danger. I looked at her differently after that. She was no longer a guest. She was my guardian. We walked together every day, slept together every night. I started to feel at peace again, but only because of her. When the summer ended, so did my time in that house. I found a smaller place, no yard, no room for a dog like June. It broke my heart. I wanted to keep her. I begged the building manager to make an exception, but they refused. No pit bulls, no exceptions. The day I handed her back, she didn't growl. She didn't snarl. She just looked at me. I kissed her scarred head and whispered, "You saved me," and I meant it. The summer didn't end after that morning. I still had 6 more weeks in that house. And even though the 3 men never came back, or at least not that I knew of, something inside me had changed. I started triple locking doors. I kept the shotgun closer. I jumped at every sound. A creak, a thud, a neighbor's cough. They all made my pulse. But June, she changed too. She stopped sleeping at the edge of the bed. She climbed into it, pressed herself against my side, and stayed there every single night. She'd wait until I fell asleep, and more often than not, I'd wake up with her massive head resting on my stomach, her breath slow and steady, guarding me, even in rest. One late afternoon, I decided to take June on a walk around the block. The sun was still up, streets quiet, cicadas buzzing in the trees. It should have been peaceful. But halfway down the road, June froze. Yeah. Her tail stiffened, ears perked. She turned her head slowly toward the alley that cut behind the housing complex. I followed her gaze, and I saw nothing. But June didn't move. Her body blocked mine, a wall of muscle and silent warning. We waited like that, frozen, for maybe 30 seconds. Then she growled, not loud, just low and vibrating in her chest. "Let's go," I whispered, pulling the leash. She didn't argue. We walked back home, fast. I didn't run. I didn't look back. But I knew we weren't alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. In the weeks that followed, I stopped walking June far. Just the yard, just close by. I filed another incident report with the office, but no one did much. Campus police gave me a pamphlet about safety and a phone number. Thanks, I started journaling, trying to make sense of my fear. My therapist later called it hypervigilance, a classic PTSD symptom. Whatever its name, I lived with it, and June lived with me. We became something more than pet and owner. We were trauma bonded. Every glance she gave me felt like a question. "Are you okay?" Every time I touched her scarred back, I whispered, "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep her. My new apartment wouldn't allow large breeds, no pit bulls, no exceptions. I tried everything. I called, I pleaded. I offered extra deposits, therapy training, proof that she was harmless. No one budged. On our last night together, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with June beside me, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every warning growl, every inch she placed between me and the door. "You knew," I whispered, "before I did." She licked my hand once, then rested her head on my chest. That morning, I packed her toys in her bed, folded her blankets, slipped in a note to her next family. "She's not just a good dog. She's the best dog. She's smart, brave, and kind. Treat her like she saved someone's life, because she did." I handed her off to a foster service that worked with veterans. They paired dogs like June with people who had seen war, who understood trauma and loyalty in the same breath. Weeks later, I got an update. June had been placed with a retired Marine who lived in the countryside. Big house, big yard, lots of space. His therapist said he hadn't smiled in months, until June jumped into his lap and licked his face. I cried for hours. Sometimes I still dream about that morning. The snarl, the door handle turning, the shotgun in my hand. But in every dream, June is there, standing between me and the dark. And when I wake up, I still whisper, "Thank you," because no matter where she is, I know she hears me. Story number 2. They say silence is golden, but in my case, silence was the thing that almost broke me. It started with a whisper, or maybe the lack of one, just a heavy, pressing absence in the air, like something holding its breath beneath my floor. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the old pipes, and it sure as hell wasn't my imagination. Because when I moved into that house on the edge of our farm, I thought I'd finally found peace, a space of my own, a place to breathe, but something else was breathing with me, low, heavy, like something smoldering deep below, making the vents tremble ever so slightly, as if whatever lived down there was waking up. My dog started acting strange. He'd snap to attention, ears perked, eyes fixed on the basement door like someone had called his name in a voice I couldn't hear. And always at night. The night it followed me upstairs, I stopped calling it quirks of an old house. It wasn't just bumps anymore. Shadows grew bolder. Oh, and then came the night I couldn't move, lying in bed, eyes open, heart pounding, with something standing just beyond my view. The house stood like a stubborn scar on the land, concrete brick walls, chipped windows, and a roof that had seen generations. It had been there long before I was born. My grandmother once told me she worked there in her youth, bottle-feeding calves and milking cows for the family that used to own it. Nobody knew who built it. Nobody remembered who first slept under its roof. But everyone in my family had passed through it at some point. Uncles, cousins, they all lived in that house for a while. And more than one had whispered the same word, haunted. Not to me, though. Not until I had moved in. I wanted independence. Just enough distance from the main house to feel free. And for a while, it was bliss. Just me, my truck, and my dog, a shepherd mix named Roach, who liked sleeping near the vents, of all places. The first noise came on a rainy Tuesday. A deep, guttural thump, like someone had slammed a metal sheet into a wall under my floor. Roach lifted his head and tilted it, ears twitching. I sat up, staring at the air vent across the room, wondering if the heater had gone out or a pipe had burst. I went to the basement. It was dry, cold. Still, the noise didn't come back that night, but it came back the next, and the next. By the second week, it wasn't just sound. It was presence. While watching TV at night, I'd catch movement, low, darting shadows at the corner of my eye. Not tall figures or floating wisps. No, these moved like animals. But I never found droppings, scratch marks, or fur, nothing. They moved past the kitchen door, hovered in the hallway, flickered in the bathroom mirror, always where it was darkest, always avoiding my direct gaze. I stopped snapping my head around when I saw them. I just let them pass, as if acknowledging them might invite something worse. Doors would creak open, not slam, not rattle, just open, quietly, slightly, enough to make me question myself. Had I closed that door last night? I could have sworn, but I was tired. Farm work does that to you. Still, every time it happened, I felt a tug at the base of my spine. Something instinctual, something primal, like being watched while walking in the woods alone. Then came the shift. I don't know when exactly it changed, only that I began to dread returning home after chores. The air felt thicker, like walking into a room where someone had just screamed and left. It clung to me, made my skin itch. The basement noise became louder, almost rhythmic, a slow pulse, like breathing or waiting. One night, I fell asleep with the door shut tight, as always. I woke up to find it ajar. My heartbeat instantly doubled. Roach was curled at the edge of the bed, facing the vent, growling low, almost inaudibly. The next morning, I checked every lock, every window. Everything was in place. Still, I began sleeping with the TV on. Light, I hoped, might keep whatever it was at bay. That night, I didn't fall asleep. I collapsed. Farm life had drained me. I barely made it to bed. I remember closing the door, turning off the lights, facing the wall. The sound came just as sleep took hold, a loud, heavy exhale from the vent beside my head. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't move. My chest heaved, my fingers twitched, but my body, it was frozen. My heart was pounding so violently that I could feel it in my teeth. I couldn't see the far end of the room, but I felt it, a presence. Cold, angry, inches from my bed. Something was standing there, watching me, feeding off my terror. I fought to move. My forearm twitched, then bent. It was like pushing through water. Heavy, invisible water. When I finally broke through, when I sat up, gasping, the room was empty, but not safe. I slept on the couch, lights on, TV blaring. I didn't sleep at all. I moved out soon after. Since then, nothing strange has happened, not a single whisper. I asked my grandma one more time. She still insisted no one ever died in that house. But she admitted a lot of folks who lived there said things, claimed it was haunted, moved out quick. Maybe I imagined it all, or maybe. Some homes don't need deaths to hold on to darkness. Maybe just the right kind of silence is enough. I thought it was over. Moving out felt like slamming a door shut on something ancient. I figured the silence would return, this time for good. And for a while, it did. No more shadows, no breathy thuds, no waking in frozen panic with invisible eyes boring into me. But then something odd happened. A few months after I left the farm, I was visiting my cousin Lydia. She was one of the few family members who'd also lived in that house years before me. She was always quiet about her time there, moved out fast, never gave a real reason. I used to think she just hated the isolation. We were sitting on her back porch, sipping coffee, when I finally brought it up. You ever feel weird in that old concrete house? I asked, casual-like. She didn't answer at first, just stared out into the yard like she'd swallowed something sharp. Then she said real soft, "Did it say your name too?" My stomach twisted. I hadn't told anyone about what happened that last week in the house. Not even the part where I thought I heard my own name whispered through the vents while I was half asleep. Just once, clear as day, a slow, dragging voice, like someone trying to remember how to pronounce something long forgotten. She didn't ask me to explain. She just stood up, went inside, and came back with a journal. "Read this," she said, handing it over. It was full of old entries, dreams, nightmares, sketches, descriptions of the low black shapes, the thudding sounds from below, and most unsettling, a list of names. Hers, mine, others in the family. People who had lived in that house. I asked her where she got the names. She said, "They came to me, always when I was almost asleep, always through the vent." It didn't stop there. Lydia and I started digging into the land's history. If no one remembered who built the house, maybe there were old records. We found something, a letter, hidden in the attic of the barn, inside a toolbox wrapped in oilcloth. It was addressed to someone named Elias Grin, dated 1908. The boy still will not speak. He stares at the floor and sometimes at the vent, as if he hears someone down there. We have locked the door. The noises continue. I fear the house has taken root. The others refuse to come inside now. The boy? The vent? The house has taken root. We searched county records. No mention of Elias Grin anywhere else. It was like that house erased people or kept them. Lately, I've been dreaming again, not about the house, not directly, but about things beneath. Caverns full of echoing whispers, breathing walls, a dog, maybe roach, growling, tail low, ears back, eyes white. Sometimes I see myself younger, standing in the hallway of that concrete house. The lights are out, but there's a glow in the vent and something inside it. Summerling. It's not fear anymore. It's recognition. Like I knew it once, like it's waiting for me to remember its name. Last week, I went back, not insect, just to the edge of the property line. The house is empty now. Has been for months. The windows are all shut, but I swear one curtain twitched when I pulled up. Roach, now older and slower, whined low in the back seat of my truck. He wouldn't step out, wouldn't even look at the house. I didn't plan on staying long, but I noticed something new. A trench, freshly dug, right beside the basement storm doors. And inside it, bones. Not animal bones, not fresh, but small. Human-sized. I called the sheriff anonymously. Haven't heard anything since. Maybe they'll find something, or maybe, like everything else tied to that place, it'll be quietly forgotten. Oh, but I moved 3 states away now. Different land, different house, new job. But the air vent in my bedroom sometimes creaks at night. Nothing abnormal. I tell myself it's just the house settling. But some nights, right before sleep pulls me under, I hear it again. That slow, dragging breath. Not a name this time, just a whisper. Like it's trying to remember me. Story number 3. I had just stepped out of the shower when I noticed all the kitchen cabinets were wide open. Again, I lived alone. There's something chilling about seeing your child cry at night. From a room that's been locked for months. No one else believed the house was alive until the dog refused to enter the nursery. The night I burned without fire was the night I realized this house doesn't want us here. It never did. Get out now, my son mumbled in his sleep, but it wasn't his voice. I never imagined that a house could recognize fear before a human did, but that light blue house at the edge of nowhere, well, it knew before I did. It started before the first box was unpacked. I was pregnant then, my belly round with my last child, and trying my best to build something stable out of the unstable man I was married to and the shaky job he kept running off to. When we first stepped onto the porch of that small rental with its white shutters and wrap-around embrace, I thought this could be a home. But Homes don't shiver when the wind's still. They don't blink their windows at you like nervous eyes. They don't creak a welcome when no one's walked their halls in years. So, I was a young mother and pregnant with my last child when my ex-husband and I found a cute little rental house. It had light blue siding, a large wraparound porch, white shuttered windows, a large backyard, and a separate two-car garage. The neighborhood was small, us almost shy. 4 other houses, all spaced apart like people who'd fought before and learned to live quietly. Across from us sat a Baptist church with appealing paint and a cross too tired to judge anymore. When we arrived to view the place, I noticed something odd. All of the cabinets were open when we arrived, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. You should always think something of it. The room that became the nursery. I should have known from the first time I stepped into it. I felt like the air in there was different. Too quiet, It had 2 windows and a big closet, and it always seemed brighter from the outside than it did inside. My favorite part of the house was the room that I made the nursery. It had the most light, and it had 2 windows with a large closet. But brightness isn't always warmth, and sunlight doesn't mean safety. It was the only room that didn't hold the scent of dust, the only one that seemed recently visited by something unseen. When you stood at the doorway, it invited you, but when you stepped in, the light shifted. It seemed bright looking into it, but when you walked in, it also felt really dark. It's hard to describe. It was like standing inside an open eye. We lived there for 3 years. Not because we wanted to, because it wouldn't let us go. And that nursery, that became a graveyard. The nursery eventually was shut and locked in the end. It became effectively the graveyard for all of the toys that the batteries had been removed from. But the toys would still go off on their own sometimes. Or laughing dolls with no batteries, singing bears that hadn't sung in years, plastic keys jingling at 2 a.m. Once, a toy phone rang with my dead grandmother's lullaby. I hadn't even known it could record sound. The rest of the house wasn't innocent either. Many events occurred in our home. Too many to talk about in one story, but one night made all the others look like dress rehearsals. That night, we were just getting ready for bed. My ex-husband and I were in our bedroom getting ready for bed. Our children were asleep in the room that they shared on the other side of the house. My mother was in the living room, playing on the computer. He climbed onto the bed, reaching to pull the fan chain, and that's when we heard it. A growl, low and cruel, followed by the unmistakable sound of teeth snapping at his foot. We both stared at the foot of the bed. Nothing. Not a shadow. Not a whisper. But something was there. Something hungry. I suddenly felt like someone was holding a lighter to the back of my leg. And on the back of my leg, there were like 3 long, angry red marks that began to blister in front of our eyes. My skin burned, but no flame. The doctor said it was a burn, prescribed me silver sulfadiazine. But no one could explain how I got it in a locked room, in a cool house, under a fan. The nursery had been locked for weeks. No one went in. No one wanted to. One night, my mother crawled into bed with me, terrified. She whispered urgently, trying to wake me. The children, they're crying in the nursery. The kids were in bed with us. My heart dropped. What? I said. My mother grabbed my arm, pulling me down to her. No, she said. Our babies are in our beds. I got up slowly. The sound was real now. Children crying from a room no one used. The dog was losing its mind in the backyard, barking like it had seen a ghost wearing something familiar. I turned the doorknob to the nursery. I swung the door open and the sound stopped. The room was ice cold. I heard, but only for a second. Then the crying returned from outside the nursery. I rushed out. The sound moved back in. We stayed up until sunrise. One night, I woke up to a police officer pulling me over. Yeah, that's right. No drugs involved or anything. The flashing lights in my rear view felt like a slap to the soul. My head was swimming, not from fear, but confusion. Where was I? Why was I driving? The officer tapped on the glass, and I rolled it down with shaking fingers. I was just getting medicine. For my kids, I mumbled, still trying to convince myself. But my blood ran cold when the realization hit me. My children were home alone, in that house. He followed me back. That wasn't his first time being called to our address. The police knew that it had weird things going on. Some even refused to enter. And I wish that was the worst night. It wasn't. I woke up another night with my ex-husband yelling at me. We were in the middle of the kitchen. He claimed I had stood by our children's window, telling them to get out. I didn't remember any of it, not a second. I kept demanding to know why he had woken me up when I saw my children standing there looking terrified. Then I realized he hadn't woken me in bed. I was already up in the kitchen, wide-eyed, cold, and I had no memory of moving. That's when I became afraid of sleep. I began avoiding it. Slept during the day, worked nights. Because the thing inside that house, it came for us while we were vulnerable. It was 3 a.m. The glow of the screensaver lit up my husband's silhouette standing at the foot of the bed. I called out, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, perfectly still. When I blinked, he was gone. I turned and saw his side of the bed empty. The room dropped in temperature, so cold it burned. Then the banging started. The covers were violently jerked out of my hands off of the bed. I finally took an air and I started screaming. The blinds snapped open and shut. The window AC unit cycled violently. The stench of rot filled the room. I was paralyzed, screaming for my mother like a child. And just like that, he burst through the door. He had been violently ill in the bathroom, and he could hear the banging. But it stopped when he opened the door. The next morning, I woke up with the worst headache. I worked my ex-husband, asking him to get my migraine medicine. He got up and took 2 steps and just collapsed. Panic clawed at me. I stumbled to the kitchen and found my 5-year-old son face down. Then darkness swallowed me. I woke to chaos. My daughter's body was limp, blue. She only weighed about 30 lipias, and she was 3. And I dragged her out of the house, and she felt like she weighed a ton. I remember the heaviness, not just her body, but the weight of knowing she wasn't breathing. I went back in for my phone, intending to die with her if I had to. But when I returned, her eyes were open and she was breathing. The paramedics came. Lethal levels of carbon monoxide is 30 per square foot. It was over 500 in my own home. Yet, everything was working fine. The investigator could find no cause. After we survived, we tried to explain. My middle child said that he had been woken by a child who told him to get up and go out, and to go to the kitchen to turn off the burner because it was on but not lit. But no one had cooked, and no one had turned the stove on. That ghost child, he described him again later. Same hair, same clothes. My daughter said that she remembers playing with a black cat and then describing the same child along with the cat watching me drag her body out. And then they taught her how to come back. I watched as skeptics online dismissed it all. But carbon monoxide didn't cause our toys to move without batteries. It didn't cry through the walls or turn on faucets. It didn't explain how the police heard screams before even entering. All the furniture was gone. I was alone, cleaning. Someone knocked. I looked through the peephole. My neighbor stood there. Then headlights behind him. I opened the door. And there was no one, no neighbor, no car. Then impact. It felt like a truck had slammed into me. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled toward the bedroom for my inhaler, but blacked out. I woke, falling, crashing into the living room wall. Disoriented, frozen. I stripped down and ran a hot bath. My teeth were chattering and I was so pale. My phone, hidden in my bra, slid to the floor. I called my ex-husband sobbing. He said I'd been missing 5 hours. They had searched the house. No one saw me. And still, the fire inspector confirmed no leaks, no malfunctions. We thought leaving would save us, but it followed us. The new house was clean and bright. The ceilings vaulted like a cathedral. But one day, I felt it again. There was a sort of feeling of static building up in the room. I froze. Then it slammed into the ceiling. The storm door blew open into the yard. Our car alarm screamed. It was back. I was painting in the living room. My youngest was upstairs playing. She started yelling about her toy. I thought she was talking to an imaginary friend. Then I heard the scream. I got to the landing. My daughter had a hold of her doll's feet with both hands, and her body was straight up at a 45-degree angle pulling. Something else had the doll by the hair. Bas, they were in a tug of war. Duh! She dropped it and fell hard when she heard me. I scooped her up and ran, picked up my boys, never returned. We lost Shane. One of my sons, unfortunately, took his own life shortly after this. And I will always wonder if it had something to do with what tormented us. I spiraled. Drugs, anger, despair. I declared war on God. Boy, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a husk. I shared my story later on TV, and people laughed. They said I had been high during all of it, but I hadn't started using until after Shane. Carbon monoxide didn't follow us house to house. It didn't blow out a glass door. It didn't burn me. I lived through it, and I'm still here. There was one part of the house we never dared touch, the attic. From the outside, you wouldn't know it even existed. There were no pull-down ladders, no ceiling hatches in plain sight. Just an old sealed wooden panel above the hallway between the nursery and the bathroom, like a scar the house didn't want you picking at. But one night, curiosity won. It was just me. The kids were at school. The silence in the house was like holding your breath too long, thin, stretching. I dragged a chair over and poked the panel with a broom handle. It gave a groan so deep it echoed in my chest. Dust fell. Then the panel dropped down like a jaw unhinging. A breath of cold air whispered over my face. I stood on the chair, hesitating, before poking my head up. It was dark. Not just dark, but wrong. The kind of darkness that doesn't let your eyes adjust. A velvet black that ate light. Still, I climbed up. Boxes. Old ones. Layers of them. And in the middle of that space, a circle drawn in chalk. The smell of something long dead lived in that wood. But the worst part wasn't the markings or even the rat-bitten stuffed toy in the middle. It was the sound, a whimper, faint, just once, but it was a child. I scrambled down, heart clawing out of my ribs. I slammed the panel back into place and shoved the chair into a closet. For the first time in years, I locked a door behind me, not to keep someone out, but to keep something in. Across the road sat that tired old Baptist church. During the first year, I didn't pay it much mind. The cross was always tilted, like it was shrugging. But one evening, I noticed the lights inside were on. Odd. It hadn't been used in years. I walked over, slowly. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to believe someone holy could bless the air I was breathing. The front door was open. Candles were lit along the aisle, flickering unnaturally slow. At the far end stood a man in black robes, back turned to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but couldn't. I took one step forward, and all the candles went out at once. He vanished. I ran. The next morning, I went back to check, thinking maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But the door was locked with chains, rusted shut. No sign of anyone having entered in years. Still, sometimes at night, the lights flickered again. And every so often, the church bell rang altus, even though the bell had been removed before we ever moved in. About a week after the attic, I started hearing things in the woods behind the house. Laughter. Children's laughter. Except my children were inside, asleep, or at school, or sitting beside me when I heard it. I thought maybe an animal, a raccoon or owl, but it spoke, laughed. It called my name. One morning, after a sleepless night, I followed the sound. I slipped on boots, grabbed a flashlight even though it was bright out, and walked into those woods behind the property. About 30 yards in, I found it. A porcelain doll, clean and untouched, sitting on a rotting tree stump, dressed in a tiny black dress with a stitched mouth. Her eyes were open, too real. I bent to look closer, and that's when I heard it. The doll whispered, "Mommy." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up. I backed away slowly, and the doll turned its head. Turned it. That was the last time I went into those woods. 'Cause There was a patch of wall in the hallway that ran from the master bedroom to the living room. It began to breathe. At first, I thought it was some trick of shadow, heat warping the paint. But then I noticed the wallpaper pulsing like lungs, expanding, contracting, as if the house was inhaling my fear. One night, I placed my hand on it. It was warm, then hot. Then I felt a pulse, a heartbeat. I pressed harder, in shock, and something pressed back. I jumped, stumbling into the laundry basket. My hand burned like I'd touched a stove. I never touched that wall again. But it continued to pulse at night, like something living had grown beneath it. And when I'd pass, sometimes it would exhale, like it was waiting for me to stop walking. It happened in the hallway mirror. Or we had this long, narrow mirror near the entrance, just cheap glass in a faux wooden frame. I passed it every day and barely noticed it, until the night I saw myself still standing there after I'd walked away. It was subtle at first, like a lag in a video. But one night, I was standing in front of it brushing my hair when I turned to walk away, and my reflection didn't. It stayed, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted, frozen. I stopped mid-step, turned slowly, and it moved, catching up, as if someone had pressed play again. I stopped brushing my hair at night after that. A few days later, my son was talking to himself in the hallway. I asked him who he was talking to. He said, "The other mommy. She watches us through the wall glass." I took that mirror down, hid it in the garage under a tarp. Yeah, a week later, it was back up on the wall, clean, polished, still smelling. I hadn't watched TV in a long time. The house made me too anxious to sit still, let alone focus on a show. But one afternoon, after scrubbing the kitchen for the third time just to keep my mind busy, I sat down and turned it on. Nothing but static. Oh, I hit the remote, changed the input, checked the cables. Nothing. Then suddenly, the static cleared. Oh, it was my living room. Live on the screen, I saw myself sitting on the couch. God, the same angle, same lighting, same everything. Except on the screen, I wasn't moving. I was smiling. I stood slowly and turned around. Yeah, there was nothing behind me. But when I looked back at the screen, the version of me on the couch turned to the camera and waved. I yanked the plug out of the wall and threw the TV outside. It turned itself back on the next night, broadcasting a room I hadn't seen before, one with chains, and a crib. Oh, I swore we had donated that crib years ago. But there it was, reassembled in the center of the nursery, fully intact, no dust, a soot, no fingerprints. No one admitted to putting it there. Not my husband, not my mother. The thing is, we didn't even have a baby anymore. I avoided it for days. Then one evening, I walked in, flashlight in hand. I nudged the crib gently. It rocked once, softly. Then again, violently. From inside, I heard it, a baby's giggle. I stepped back, heart in my throat. I looked down and saw the plush cat we had lost years ago. The one my daughter said her invisible friend had taken. It blinked at me. I left the room and locked the door. By morning, the crib was gone again. But the plush toy stayed. Now it sleeps at the foot of my bed. The final night before we left for good, I had a dream. I was standing in our backyard. It was pitch black except for the glow coming from the nursery window. All the other windows were dark. Behind me, the trees were swaying violently, but there was no wind. I heard my son's voice behind me, faint. "Don't leave her behind." I turned and saw no one. Then I looked back up at the nursery window. A little girl was standing there. Not mine. She had long black hair, soaking wet. She tilted her head and mouthed something I couldn't hear. I tried to move, but my feet were stuck. When I finally woke, my pillow was soaked through. The house was freezing. The plush cat was sitting on my chest. And across the room, the mirror had cracked right down the middle. That morning, we packed and drove away. We never went back. But sometimes, when I dream, I'm still there. After we moved, I made a promise to myself. Never look back, never dig, never ask questions. But trauma doesn't obey promises. About 2 months after settling into the new place, a contractor came to check a leak in the ceiling above the living room. He pulled out a portion of the drywall to inspect the insulation and found something lodged between the studs. It was a notebook, wrapped in a yellowed pillowcase, tied with hair, not thread, hair. He handed it to me, disturbed. I could feel it vibrating with heat. The pages were filled with drawings, childish at first glance. Stick figures, windows, suns with jagged mouths. But then they got darker. One drawing showed our house, accurate to the smallest detail, including the crooked back step no one but us ever noticed. Another showed a woman asleep with dark shapes climbing over her. The final page, my son holding the plush cat, standing next to a girl in a black dress. Neither of them were smiling. I don't talk about her much, not even to therapists, because she never made it into this world. So, a miscarriage. Second trimester. I was alone when it happened. My husband was on tour. My mother was gone. I remember lying on the bathroom floor, blood mixing with the tile grout, whispering to something that would never have a name. I buried the sonogram under the old tree in the backyard. I never told anyone. Until my daughter started drawing her. She says her name is Anna. She told me one morning, sliding a crayon sketch across the table, she lives in the mirror and wants to play with me. The drawing had black eyes, no mouth. I asked how she knew her name. She told me. She said, "She's my sister." That was the only time I've ever passed out from fear. You'd think after everything, I would have learned to expect the unexpected. But some things still catch you off guard. I was taking a shower, just a normal evening, hot water, closed eyes, letting the steam numb everything. When I opened my eyes, I saw it, blood, running down the tiles. Not pink, not faint, but deep, arterial red. I stepped back in horror, turning off the faucet. But it kept coming, pouring from the shower head. I screamed, reached for a towel, slipped. By the time I scrambled out of the tub and looked again, the water was clear, pristine. No stain, no evidence, just the smell of rust lingering in the air. For days afterward, I kept finding red handprints on the mirror. Too small to be mine. The most cruel thing the house ever did was speak with Shane's voice. It started a year after his death. A voice on the baby monitor. Static giving way to a whisper, "Mom." I thought I was losing my mind, but then it said my name, my real name, and it said, "I'm still cold." I tore the monitor out of the wall. I smashed it to pieces. But the next night, the sound came again. This time, through the radio. Same voice, same sentence. "I'm still cold." I couldn't breathe. The grief, the guilt, the rage, I fell to the floor sobbing. The radio cut off suddenly. Then a whisper from the hallway, "But I'm not alone." I slept with every light on for 3 days. I don't remember driving there. I just woke up in the car, engine running, parked outside the blue house. It had new siding, a different color. Someone else lived there now. But I felt pulled. I stepped out. The air smelled the same. The porch still groaned beneath my feet. I walked to the nursery window and looked inside. There was a crib, a new one, but the plush cat was there on the windowsill, facing out, watching. I turned to leave, but the front door creaked open behind me, empty inside, and on the wall, in fresh crayon, was one word: "Stay." After we left, the dreams started. Good. At first, they were memories, echoes. But then, the house began changing. In my dreams, it was never quite the same. Sometimes, the porch led into the nursery. Sometimes, the attic staircase spiraled up forever. The house would bend itself in ways that defied logic. Doors where walls used to be, windows showing nothing but black. And always I was alone. No matter how many people were in the dream at first, they vanished the moment I crossed the threshold. One night, I dreamt the house was underwater, still and silent, floating like a shipwreck. I walked barefoot through flooded hallways, the water thick like oil, and voices whispered from the corners, "Come back. We miss you." You were ours. I woke with my pillow soaked, not in sweat, but in salt water. The smell of mold clung to my hair for days. 3 weeks ago, someone knocked on my door at 3-some. I didn't move at first, just listened. Then the knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I looked through the peephole, no one. But when I opened the door, I found something sitting on the mat. The notebook, the same one from the wall. Same pillowcase, same hair. Inside, only one new page. A drawing of me, asleep in bed. And the words written in uneven, childlike scrawl. "You forgot the promise." I burned it. But I could still smell the pages the next morning. It was subtle at first. She'd pause before introducing herself, forget how to spell her name, insist on being called something else. "Wren," she said, a name I never gave her. I thought it was a phase. Then I found her journal. She had been writing in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Jagged, looping. She signed her name Wren and wrote entries like, "Today I walked through the black field. Anna let me pet the cat. It had too many eyes." Another entry said, "Mom is still pretending. She doesn't remember the deal." I confronted her. She screamed like a stranger and clawed at her skin. When she came back to herself, she didn't remember any of it, but she never answered to her real name again. I got a package in the mail, no return address, just a VHS tape. I don't even own a player anymore, but I found one at a thrift store. Cheap, dusty, still worked. I popped in the tape. It was footage of the nursery, but from an angle that couldn't exist, above, near the ceiling, looking down, like a fly on the wall. There was movement, a figure, female, hair covering the face, crawling along the floor on all fours, backward. Then it turned toward the camera and whispered my name. I yanked the tape out, smashed it, burned it. The next day, the TV turned on by itself, static, and then that same figure, crawling closer. I wish I could say it all stopped. That time healed it, that I found peace. But that would be a lie, because part of me never left that house. I see her sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, a woman who looks like me, but older, colder, watching from the edge of mirrors, the bottom of staircase. She never speaks, but she's always near when the lights flicker, when the air goes still, when my children wake up screaming. She is me, the part I left behind when I crawled out of that house with a dying child in my arms, the part that broke and never quite came back together. And I think one day she's going to take my place. Story number 4. Children dream of candy and games. My nightmare began with a single ringgit note under a broken stall light. People say monsters don't exist. I say they've never worked the night shift at a Malaysian market. When I was 9, I thought I was invincible, until a man's shadow taught me otherwise. What kind of adult lingers in the dark just out of a child's reach, holding out money like bait? I thought I was playing make-believe until the game turned into a silent hunt. Children dream of candy and games. My nightmare began with a single ringgit note under a broken stall light. I remember the warm smell of fried food floating in the night air, the buzz of neon signs reflecting off puddles, and the rhythm of footsteps echoing through the narrow alleys of the night market. My parents ran a shoe stall, leather sandals, cheap slippers, knockoff sneakers stacked like bricks. Every night felt like a celebration, except that night. My parents used to work as a night market vendor, and they were selling shoes back then. My mom did warn me to stay cautious and not to wander off too far, especially at night. It was one of those evenings where the air was thick and electric. I was 9, restless, curious, and bored out of my mind. So I played, pretending I was on a mission. A Pokemon trainer maybe, chasing invisible creatures. I stayed near the van, just close enough to hear the shuffle of my mom's sandals and the metallic thud of shoes being unpacked. And that's when I saw him. He was tall, almost painfully thin and still as death, behind the frame of a rusted, abandoned burger stall. At first, I thought he was just another vendor, closing up, maybe taking a smoke break. But his eyes, they were fixed on me like I was prey. He didn't say a word, just raised his hand and showed me something. He was hiding behind an abandoned burger stall just a few meters away from me. Showed me an RM1 on his hand. He beckoned with his hand, inviting me to come closer. I froze. The market was full of people, yet I felt completely alone. like I was the only one hearing the unspoken call. There was no sound, no warning, just that awful gesture, like a fisherman flicking bait toward the edge of the dock. It wasn't the money that unsettled me. It was how deliberate it all felt. He placed the note on the table and slowly backed into the shadows. My heart pounded in my throat. Bakiko. It all made sense to me. So I backed away, trying to keep myself closer to the light and in the eye of the crowd. Still, he didn't leave. Instead, he emerged again, closer this time. A thicker wad of cash now. I could tell he was watching to see if I'd break. He wasn't speaking, just standing perfectly still in the crowd, like a ghost playing a part. I didn't want to panic, but my body knew what my mind hadn't caught up with yet. He blended in with the crowd, now with a much bigger wad of cash in his hand. He stood for a way, a strategic bois. I turned toward the van, pretending not to notice him. My hands found a toy hammer from one of the unpacked boxes. I waved it lazily like I was still playing. But in truth, I was waiting to see if he'd flinch, retreat, or charge. Nothing is more terrifying than the moment you think you've escaped, only to find the monster has changed its angle. Eventually, he was gone, just vanished. No one else noticed. I wanted to believe I imagined it. A tired kid with too much imagination. So I climbed into the van, curling up on the seat and watching the stars through a cracked window. I kept looking through the window for a whole minute, but the man was nowhere to be found. So I thought that he was gone. It felt safe until it didn't. But from the corner of my eye, a silhouette passed in front of the van, tall, bony, and moving toward the unlocked side door. I didn't even breathe. I just ran. That was when I saw the head of a familiar haircut walking in front of the van window to the other door. A door that I knew was unlocked. I found my mom and told her everything. The money, the man, the feeling. She didn't hesitate. She told my dad. My dad followed me, but by that time, the man had disappeared, leaving the money on the top of the same table. Predators don't need to catch you to win. Sometimes it's enough just to show you how close they came. My dad walked to the table and grabbed the money. He took the money and gave it to me, and he told me to stay in his sight that night. But it didn't feel like a victory. That RM note felt radioactive in my hands, like proof of something that almost, though, that was the last time I saw the man. I've gone back to that market years later, walking the same cracked pavement, now faded with time. The burger stall's gone, replaced by a bubble tea stand. Kids laugh and run just like I did. But sometimes I wonder, was I the only one he watched that night? How many other kids had followed the money? Were they luckier than me, or not at all? And it's always made me question just how many other victims he had. Had he been caught yet? Is he in jail now? I don't know. But I sure don't like to think about it either. Story number 5. Have you ever felt your lungs tighten while your body won't move, and yet something is whispering your name? The night I heard the clock chime and a child's voice echo, "Daddy," was the night I stopped trusting my own house. My dad swore nothing happened, but my cousin told me a story that he had already told about me, screaming. This wasn't just sleep paralysis. Something opened the door. Something wanted in. The clock was old. No one knew where it came from. But I should have known. Things that tick sometimes want more than time. You know how some objects carry a presence? Not just history, but a kind of stillness that feels like it's listening. I was in middle school when I found it. An antique wooden clock, small but heavy, resting quietly in the basement among cardboard boxes and old furniture. Nobody knew where it came from. My parents just shrugged when I asked, brushing me off with a lazy, "Use it if you want." It was a wooden clock, and it was pretty small, but it would chime 3 times to signal the new start of every hour. I liked that part. The song it played had a calming rhythm, oddly musical, almost sacred. I brought it to my bedroom, set it beside my bunk bed. I slept on the bottom, my brother on the top. That clock became part of my nights, familiar, soothing. For weeks, maybe months, nothing happened, until it did. You don't forget the first time your body betrays you. I woke up one night and instantly I knew something was wrong. My limbs were locked, weighted, as if the air itself had thickened into tar. I realized quickly that this was sleep paralysis, a dream. That's what I told myself. But the pressure, God, the pressure felt too heavy to be part of a dream. It was centered in my chest, crawling up my throat. My eyes were open. The door across from me was shut tight. Then it began to open, slowly. No sound, just motion. Unnatural, natural, and deliberate. At this point, I'm screaming for my dad because my parents' room was right next to mine. But nothing came out. I tried yelling, but all that escaped was silence and panic. My throat convulsed, my lungs shrank, my whole being vibrated with dread. I was choking. Then he was there. My dad, he shook me awake. Dreams don't resume after you wake up, not unless they want to finish something. I barely remembered drifting back to sleep, but as soon as I did, the door in my dream was already halfway open. So I'm screaming again, asking for my dad to help me, and I'm seeing the door almost fully open now, and I'm shaking. The presence had returned, looming, invisible, evil. It pressed against me with more weight, like it had grown stronger from my fear. I tried to wake myself by moving my head. It was the only trick I knew. I writhed, panicked, desperate. That's when the clock chimed, once, twice, thrice, and over the chimes I heard it, a girl's voice, whispering, mocking, "Daddy." It wasn't calling for help. It was copying me. Each daddy twisted with cruelty, like a child mimicking a joke it didn't understand. You've never known helplessness until a voice speaks inches from your ear and you can't move. I awoke on my side. Facing the wall is us. I felt that evil presence on the other side of my bed. My back was cold. I knew something was behind me. I didn't dare turn. I stared at the wall for what felt like hours. No blinking, no breathing. In the morning, I asked my dad again if anything weird had happened. He said no, but that lie cracked just days later at a family gathering. My cousin froze mid-conversation as I casually told her about the dream. They told me that they had heard this story from my dad, allegedly, and I was confused because I was like, "What?" She said that my dad had told the family that he found me screaming and choking in my sleep that night. He had to shake me violently to wake me, and even then, I was trembling. He said he had never heard anything like the scream that came from my room. My stomach twisted. Why would he lie to me about that? I suddenly remembered every time my parents had dismissed my paranormal experiences as imagination. They always said I was sensitive, dramatic. But this time, they knew, and they said nothing. I unplugged the clock the next day. I turned off the clock and I put it back in the basement. Years passed. I eventually asked my dad what happened to it. He had thrown it away. No explanation. Just a quiet decision to destroy it. I left that house after high school. I never saw the little girl again, but my brother did. We talked once, years later. He told me that when he stayed up late, sometimes he saw a girl sitting by the basement stairs. Every time, she looked up slowly. And every time, he felt like he wasn't allowed to move. There's something in that basement, something that borrowed a clock to speak. Story number 6. It started with a door, not mine, but the one across the hall always cracked open as if daring someone to peek in. I never did, not at first. I once believed the worst thing about apartment living was the smell of reheated fish wafting through shared vents. I was wrong. Some people don't hide their strangeness. They wear it like a uniform, quiet, controlled, offbeat. But others, they try too hard to be normal. That's what unnerves me. You ever feel watched by someone who's not looking at you? That kind of presence lingers like static in the air, subtle but suffocating. Before him, my nights were silent. Now I flinch at the smallest sound. I used to sleep easy. Now, I sleep with one eye open. I live in a pretty average apartment complex. Nothing fancy, 3 floors and kind of quiet. I liked it that way. Peaceful, uneventful, forgettable. The kind of place where no one asks questions and everyone minds their own business. Ideal for someone like me. It was about a year in when he moved in, Unit 2B, right across the hall. I didn't catch his name, and I never asked. We passed each other once, near the mailboxes. He looked early 30s, lean, with a buzz cut, always wearing the same gray hoodie, even when it's hot out. It clung to him like a uniform or maybe armor. There was something wrong with how still he was. Not in a meditative, peaceful way, more like a paused video. His movements, when they came, felt calculated, timed. I once saw him exit his apartment, pause mid-step, then step back in and close the door. No expression, no explanation. I told myself he must have forgotten something. Still, I watched longer than I should have. He leaves his door open sometimes, though not like open, but sort of cracked open, just enough to see the light on the inside. Never any noise, no TV, no talking, just light, constant and gush. It flickered once. I remember that vividly because it was the first time I realized he had electricity, but not a single sound until I never saw anyone visit. No deliveries, no noise. He never used the communal laundry room. His trash can left out every Monday night. Always looked untouched, like he was recycling air. One night, I caught him just standing in the hallway, not doing anything, no phone, and just standing by his door, staring at the floor like he was waiting for something. He stood there for minutes. I said, "Hey," out of reflex, and he didn't even flinch, just kept standing there like I wasn't even there. What? Something in my chest tightened. You know that eerie sensation, like your body knows danger before your brain does? That's what I felt walking past him, like something invisible brushed against my soul. Last night wasn't the first time I felt uneasy, but it was the first time I felt threatened. I woke up at around 3 o'clock in the morning because I heard this sort of soft knocking noise. Not the aggressive pounding king of an angry neighbor, not the polite tap of delivery. It was measured, quiet, almost like someone practicing how to knock without being heard. 3 taps, then balance. I held my breath and waited, eyes locked on my bedroom door. I thought it was my door, but when I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Empty hallway, same quiet carpet. My heartbeat was the only thing I could hear. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. That's when I heard it again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from inside the hallway. Just slow, spaced out knocks, like somebody testing how quiet they could be. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My instincts screamed, "Don't open it." But I did. I opened the door and looked out. Nothing. But his door was open again, a little wider than usual. In fact, just enough to see inside, or rather, to not see. I couldn't see anything inside. Just darkness, though, like the light had been turned off for the first time. I stood there, unblinking, trying to adjust my eyes. But the darkness wasn't empty. It felt dense, like something in there didn't want to be seen. I didn't step closer. I shut my door, locked everything, sat in my living room with the lights on like an idiot for an hour before going back to bed. When morning came, I didn't go to work. I made coffee I never drank and sat in my living room, eyes fixed on his door. Nothing. He didn't leave his apartment at all today. And I know this because I stayed home from work just to see it. Not a creak, not a sound. Door shut tight. That feeling in my chest didn't leave. If anything, it got worse. On the 3rd night, I left my TV on, low volume, some nature documentary. It was supposed to calm me down. It didn't. Around midnight, I muted it. I hadn't heard anything, but I felt something, like a shift in the air, a subtle electricity buzzing at the base of my skull. I stood, walked to the door again, and without even thinking, looked through the peephole. His door was wide open this time. My heart jumped. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. There was no furniture, no box, no sign anyone had ever lived there. Just one thing, a tall figure standing near the center of the room. Still as stone, my brain tried to rationalize. A mannequin, I thought. Maybe he's an artist. That would explain the silence, right? But mannequins don't tilt their heads when they know you're watching. I stepped back so hard I almost tripped, closed all 3 locks, then wedged a chair beneath the knob. I didn't sleep. I watched the peephole every 10 minutes. Nothing changed. The figure didn't move. Or maybe it did. I couldn't be sure anymore. At 4:17 a.m., I finally dozed off on the couch, TV still muted. Oh, God. I woke up the next morning to knocking again, only this time it was different. Rhythmic, purposeful. But it wasn't at my door. I crept to the peephole and saw a delivery guy standing outside his apartment. Red vest, clipboard in hand. "Package for 2B?" he called out. No response. After about a minute, the guy shrugged, walked off. I stepped out as he was leaving and asked, "Was the door open when you got there?" He paused. "No. Shut tight." But when I looked back, it was ajar again. Something in me snapped. I needed answers. That afternoon, I knocked on the door of the woman who lived directly below Tuba, Mrs. Lavoie. She was in her 60s, quiet, and known to water her plants at exactly 7 o'clock p.m. every day. I asked her what she knew about the man upstairs. Her face went pale. "You've seen him?" she asked. "Yeah." I nodded. "He lives across from me." She whispered, "No, he doesn't." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then stepped aside and motioned me in. She had an old box of security camera tapes. Apparently, she'd kept them since the complex stopped maintaining official CCTV 2 years ago. "You're not the first one," she said. That unit'd been off. I watched 3 tapes. Tape 1, footage from last fall. My hallway, 3:12 a.m. The door to 2B opens. A man walks out, gray hoodie, buzz cut. But he vanishes after 3 steps. Not a cut, not a glitch. He just disappears mid-frame. Tape 2, Halloween night. Trick-or-treaters run past his door. One kid stops, stares at the peephole, then screams and runs. The door was closed the entire time. Tape 3, 2 weeks ago. Me, taking out the trash. I say something to him, but the camera shows nothing. I'm alone in the hallway, talking to air. I left her apartment shaking, head pounding. I tried calling the building manager. No one answered. Oh, that night, I made a decision I might never recover from. I left my door unlocked. I wanted it to come in, whatever it was. Not because I was brave. I was exhausted of sleep, of paranoia, of not knowing if I was going insane. I left every light on, sat facing the door, waiting. 3:03 a.m. I heard the doorknob click. I didn't move. The door opened slowly, but nothing came through. No sound, no footsteps. Then the lights started dimming one by one. Living room first, then kitchen, then hallway. I stood, heart racing, and walked toward the door. Across the hall, the apartment gaped wide open. This time I stepped in, and what I saw, I can't explain. There were no walls, no furniture, just a black void stretching in every direction. And at the center, a mirror. I looked into it and saw myself, but older, paler. My eyes were hollow. Then the reflection moved, Before I did, it raised its hand, pointed at me. The walls began closing in, darkness swallowing everything. I screamed, ran backward, stumbled out the door, back into my apartment, slammed it shut. Silence. Silence. No door across the hall, just a blank wall. The unit was gone, replaced with bricks that didn't match the rest of the building. It's been a week. No one remembers Unit 2B. The manager says my floor only has 3 units, but I remember. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear 3 soft knocks coming from inside of my closet. And the mirror in my hallway, sometimes it blinks first. Story number 7. You never expect a sheet of newspaper to become the loudest scream in the silence. But that's exactly what happened the night I felt something reach for me without ever touching me. It started with a click, not a creak, not a thud. 3 deliberate, human-like clicks echoing from the hallway. The kind of sound someone might make to lure a cat. Except there was no cat, just me, alone on a couch, and something unseen standing just out of sight. I wasn't high. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't dreaming. That much I can swear on. Everyone else had gone to bed, and I was lying on my back with the blue glow of YouTube videos flickering across my face when the room shifted. Not physically, but it felt like something had moved out and something else had moved in. The air got heavier. The space felt wider, colder, like it was missing something familiar. I chalked it up to nerves, maybe leftover creepiness from the show my mom and I had just binged. But then came the second sign. Something kept brushing my knee. A single strand of hair, maybe. Except when I tried to find it, there was nothing there. And then the newspaper moved. So, me and my younger brother were visiting my mom for this most recent Memorial Day. Her home was 2 stories tall, nestled neatly in a quiet neighborhood that looked like nothing bad could ever happen there. She lives with her boyfriend and his daughter and son, plus my baby brother. Everyone's bedroom is on the 2nd floor, except for my stepsisters. For this trip, my brother had an air mattress in my baby brother's room, and I slept downstairs on a couch in the living room, as we have done many times before. The first few nights were ordinary, uneventful. We grilled burgers, played card games, and laughed until midnight. The kind of family weekend that lives in fridge magnets and Instagram reels. But all that warmth got stripped away in one night. It didn't creep in slowly either. No, it slammed into me like walking into a wall that wasn't there before. The moment I lay down on the couch that night, I could feel the air shifting. The space felt distorted, larger than before, like the walls had scooted back an inch. A steady humming came from the turtle tanks and the small fan behind my head. The room wasn't dark. Glowing reptile lights kept it dimly lit in blues and purples. Still, that off feeling gnawed at me like something important had been removed from the room, but I couldn't name what. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning. My mother had finished showing me the first 2 episodes of Yellow Jackets, which she is obsessed with. Creepy show, yeah, but I've seen worse. That's not what scared me. And yeah, I'd also smoked some green about 3 hours prior, but that had worn off long before I lay on the couch. I was clear-headed. I wasn't afraid yet. The first sound was so precise it made me freeze. Click, click, click. Like someone trying to get a cat's attention. It came from the hallway near the garage. Now, that hallway also leads to my stepsister's room. So I waited, half expecting to see her wander out sleepily, but nothing moved. I sort of froze, fully expecting my sister to walk out of the hallway leading as it also leads to her room, but nothing happens. I sat up a little, rationalized it. Faulty outlet? Nah, no flickering. One of the lizards, maybe? None of the reptiles' presents have that kind of capability. And if it were my stepsister, I would have heard the door creak open. Oh, the sound hadn't come from an object. It sounded human. I wanted to stress that it sounded like a person clicking their tongue, though not gears or electricity or anything. My heart was starting to race. Not panicked yet, but alert. I returned to my phone, flipping from Pinterest to YouTube, trying to distract myself. I found an old video by one of my favorite creators, familiar and comforting, until I felt the hair. However, I couldn't really find safety in it because every time that I would get too engrossed in the video, a hair would sort of glide across my knee. I would reach for it and brush it away. It would stop and then start up again. 3 times it happened, and each time there was nothing there. My skin tingled like static. I rubbed my hand across the couch. Nothing. The fan behind me wasn't pointed toward my knees, and anyway, a breeze doesn't feel like that. It wasn't just sensation. It felt deliberate. The off feeling persisted, like something unseen was waiting, watching. I finally get ticked off with the hair, and I go for my blanket. I pulled it over me like armor, hoping comfort would drown the dread. And there's this weird, vivid moment of me noticing that a portion of my blanket is draped over the couch arm hanging out of sight. And I'm suddenly scared to pull it because I'm terrified that it's about to go taut like something has snagged it. But nothing did. I almost convinced myself I was imagining everything. My eyes were heavy. The video was calming. And then next to the couch is a 2-level coffee table. And on the lower level is some newspapers laying secure on some toys. Out of nowhere, one of the papers drags itself across the floor toward me quickly. It only moves a couple of inches, but it's loud. It's sudden, and I have no idea what caused it. And I certainly don't stick around to ask any questions either. I'm on my feet, phone in my hand, because it was already there, scrambling over the couch into the stairs, which I just fly up because I'm so out of my mind scared. Ducky! My legs carried me without thinking. I didn't even look back. And when I reached the top of the stairs, I was already crying. The next thing that I know is that I'm in my mom's room standing over her telling her what just happened. Ishkikid. She listened, barely awake, and offered the bed since her boyfriend was at work. I climbed in beside her, my hands still trembling. But the thing, whatever it was, hadn't stayed downstairs. She doesn't start taking me seriously, though, until she sees that I'm still not calm after 10 minutes. She blamed the weed, the show, but none of that could explain the newspaper. The worst being me watching the TV, and Out of the corner of my eye, I see a white shirt in her closet move. I keep hearing my name being harshly whispered, too. When I'm on the verge of falling asleep, promptly waking me up and not letting me rest, it didn't want to be ignored. Not anymore. I didn't fall asleep that night, not really. I just lay there in my mother's bed, curled up on one side, pretending the pale glow from her tea would keep the darkness at bay. Seinfeld was playing, but I wasn't laughing. Every time her breathing slowed and she drifted off, it would come closer again. The feeling, the weight in the air, the sensation that something was crouched near the closet, just waiting for me to blink. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, but in my periphery, I could sense it, the silhouette of that white shirt. It didn't sway. It didn't move again. But I felt like if I turned away, even for a second, I'd find it somewhere new. The whispers started again. This time, they didn't even pretend to sound like my name. They were just hissing, like an angry breath being pushed through clenched teeth. I nudged my mom awake, told her again that I couldn't sleep, that I felt watched. She murmured something, wrapped an arm over my shoulder, and told me to just ignore it. Ignore it? That's the thing, isn't it? That's what everyone says. But no one tells you how to ignore something that stands just inches away, breathing on your soul. So I stared at the closet, at the shadows, at the shirt, at my own reflection faintly bouncing off the black TV screen once the show ended and silence returned. The house creaked. Not the old wood kind of creak, but a rhythmic one. Step, step, paw. Step again. Something was walking up the stairs. Now, here's the thing. There's no way anyone in the house would be walking at that hour. Everyone was out cold. I knew how my family slept. My baby brother would toss and mumble in his dreams. My stepbrother snored like a busted lawnmower. This wasn't them. I didn't move. My mother had dozed back off. I lay still and focused on the sound. It stopped at the top of the staircase, right outside the door. Tubre. I could hear it breathing, but not through the nose or mouth. It wasn't breath like we understand it. It was like wind struggling through cloth, like someone was wrapped in plastic and gasping against it. Then the doorknob twitched, just a small rotation. But it was enough to make me clutch my mother's arm and whisper her name. She groaned, opened one eye. Then she saw it too. The knob twitched again. She sat up, said nothing, just stared. Oh, for a second, we both thought the door might open, that something would come in. But it didn't. Instead, the floorboard outside creaked again and again. Then slowly, the sound moved away from the door, across the landing, and back down the stairs. I turned to my mom. Her eyes were wide now, fully awake. You heard that too, right? I asked. She nodded. Yeah, I did. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. You'd think morning would make things better. That sunlight could banish whatever dark thing had spent the night tormenting us. But when I stepped downstairs again, everything felt wrong. The air was stale. The fan behind the couch had stopped sometime during the night. The tanks were humming like normal, but something was off. That newspaper, the one that had moved, was now gone. I looked under the table, behind the toys, even under the couch. Nothing, just gone. No one in the house claimed to have touched it. My little brother swore he hadn't gone near the living room. My stepdad hadn't come home from his night shift yet. And my stepsister, she'd slept straight through it all. Door locked, headphones on. I didn't want to believe the paper had vanished on its own. That meant something else had taken it. I checked the door to the garage. Still locked. Alarm light blinking steady green. So how could something enter and leave without anyone hearing it? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But I know what I felt when I stood in that room again, watched, judged, like I had failed some invisible test. Later that morning, while brushing my teeth in the downstairs bathroom, I noticed something on my neck. At first, I thought it was a scratch, but when I leaned closer, I saw 3 faint parallel lines, almost too perfect to be accidental. They weren't deep, not bleeding, just red, irritated skin. I hadn't scratched myself in my sleep. I'd barely moved. And they weren't fingernail marks. They looked uniform, too neat. I asked my mom to look. She gasped when she saw them. "That wasn't there last night," she whispered. No one else in the house had anything similar. No bug bites, no marks, just me. I don't know why, but the sight of those marks broke me more than anything else. It was proof. Not enough to show the world, sure, but proof to me that something had touched me. The worst part isn't that it happened. The worst part is that even now, days, weeks later, I still don't feel alone. At night, I catch glimpses in mirrors, shapes that aren't natural, movements behind me that stop when I turn, and the dreams. God, the dreams, such as they aren't violent, they're worse than that. They're cold, colorless. I dream of being submerged in dark water, unable to move, while something watches me from the surface. In one dream, the newspaper floats above me, dripping, smoldering, whispering. I wake up drenched in sweat, my blanket twisted into a knot around my legs, and sometimes just before I wake, I hear it again, that click. 3 slow clicks, like it's still trying to get my attention. And maybe it already has. Story number 8. You know that moment when silence gets too loud? When a still room suddenly feels like it's watching you? I never thought I'd be the kind of person to sleep with one eye open. But after that night, I haven't slept quite the same. My mom's house never felt haunted. It was cozy, suburban, filled with fish tanks and kids' laughter. But something changed that last night. It wasn't just the noise, it was the feeling, the pressure in the air, like something waiting, lurking. People always say, you were high, or you watched something spooky. But what if I told you I was clear-headed when the newspaper slithered across the floor toward me? Nothing had ever touched me before. Nothing invisible, at least. But when that hair brushed across my knee, over and over again, I swear something was trying to make contact. And even after I ran, even after I climbed into bed with my mom, that presence followed. I felt it in the closet. I heard it whisper my name. It didn't want me to sleep. It wanted me to notice it. My mom's new house was beautiful in the daylight. 2 floors, sunlight pouring in, aquariums bubbling softly, and plants hanging in bright corners. I was visiting for the weekend with my younger brother. Everyone had their rooms upstairs, except for my stepsister. She slept downstairs, where I would too, on the couch near the fish tanks. The days were easy. Family dinners, goofy conversations, and laughter filling every corner. The weekend was super fun too. Relaxed. And every night I slept peacefully and comfortably. Well, all except for the last one. That night, after watching a couple episodes of a thriller series with my mom, I got ready for bed. She headed upstairs. I stayed behind in the reptile room, the living room, technically. The tanks hummed. The fan buzzed behind my head. It was far from dark, with soft blue light glowing from the terrarium lamps. I lay down, phone in hand, half scrolling, half zoning out. It was right about here is where I began to feel this off feeling. The room felt emptier, like there was way more space, like something was missing, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. I wasn't alone in the house, but something made the air feel hollow, thinner, colder. I kept scrolling, tried not to feed the unease. I'd smoked earlier, yes, but I was completely sober now. That wasn't paranoia. I knew what being high felt like, and this wasn't it. I was mid-scroll when I heard it, 3 sharp clicks from the hallway leading to the garage. Oh, Mickey. The best way that I can describe it is that the clicks sounded like someone making when they're trying to sort of coax a cat to come to them. My heart skipped. I paused, eyes on the hallway, fully expecting my stepsister to appear, but no one came. No door opened, no footsteps, just silence. I ran through every possible explanation. Could a light fixture make that sound? No flickering. Could it be one of the reptiles? Impossible. Could it be a mechanical glitch? Nothing had ever clicked like that before. I want to stress that it sounded like a person clicking their tongue, though not gears or electricity or anything dropping because I looked. I had heard my mom talk once about feeling something in this house. She was spiritual. She had sensed it for a while but said it faded. But maybe it hadn't faded. Maybe it just got quiet until now. I pulled the blanket up to my chest, still trying to shake the feeling. I turned my attention back to YouTube. My comfort creator was ranting about something ridiculous, but I couldn't focus. Every time I began to relax, something brushed against my knee. At first, I assumed it was a stray hair. I would reach for it and brush it away. It would stop and then start up again. But I couldn't find it. Not once. Not after checking again and again. I wasn't imagining the tickle. I could feel it glide across my skin like a warning, delicate, repetitive, insistent. The pressure in the room hadn't changed. It wasn't increasing, but it wasn't fading either. Just heavy, like it was biding its time. That was when I noticed the blanket hanging over the arm of the couch. A portion of my blanket is draped over the couch arm, hanging out of sight. And I am suddenly scared to pull it because I'm terrified that it's about to go taunt like something has snagged it. I hesitated, then pulled anyway. Nothing happened. Relief? I wrapped myself fully, hoping the barrier would be enough. I started to drift, lulled by the video and the dull hum of the room. My body relaxed, my eyes blurred. The fear slunk into the corners of my mind. Waiting? Then movement. Next to me, on the coffee table, was a lower shelf with toys and newspapers. My brother had been messing with them earlier. Suddenly, a sheet of newspaper moved quickly. It slid across the floor, a loud rasp, toward me. It only moves a couple of inches, but it's loud. It's sudden, and I have no idea what caused it. It had moved against the fan's airflow. I didn't think. I ran. I burst into my mom's room, words tumbling out. She offered her bed without question. Her boyfriend was at work. I climbed in, trembling, shaken. She assumed it was the weed, or maybe the show, but I couldn't accept that. Not with how real it all felt. Not with how the newspaper moved. Listen, I would take that explanation for everything else except for that newspaper. I mean, it was dragged toward me against the airflow of the fan behind me. It was loud, and the movement was violent. I tried to calm down, but the energy followed me. I saw a white shirt shift in her closet. No breeze, no motion. I heard my name, sharp and urgent, whispering just as I was falling asleep. No one else heard it. No one else felt it. But I know what I felt. It didn't stop just because I changed rooms. My mom fell asleep fast, used to long shifts and noisy nights, but I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the TV playing reruns of some sitcom I couldn't focus on. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shirt hanging in the open closet. It shifted, not like it was stirred by a draft, but like someone brushed past it from inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It was just a small sway, but in that frozen moment, I could feel a presence behind the fabric, watching. Then came the whisper. Not a sound from the house, not a creak or hum or buzz, but a voice, dry, low, and sharp, hissed my name right into my ear. I flinched so hard I nearly fell out of bed. My mom stirred beside me but didn't wake. I keep hearing my name being harshly whispered, too, when I'm on the verge of falling asleep, promptly waking me up and not letting me rest. I knew then I hadn't escaped anything. It wasn't about the living room. It was about me. Whatever it was had attached itself. Every time I started to drift, I'd get pulled back. A whisper, a shadow, a cold spot sliding up my leg. It was like the thing didn't want me to sleep. And another person, my mother, they didn't make it stop either. I sat up, staring into the closet, into the corners, trying to pinpoint what it wanted. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't violent. But it was there, pressing down on every inch of the room, dragging exhaustion across my bones like sandpaper. For a moment, I thought maybe this was some kind of punishment. I had fought with my brother earlier. I'd smoked. I'd watched creepy shows. But even guilt couldn't explain this constant sense of being hunted silently. It didn't want to hurt me. It wanted me to notice it. At some point near dawn, I must have dozed off or passed out from sheer exhaustion. But I woke up uneasy, the sunlight not quite banishing the dread in my chest. Nothing moved. Nothing whispered. But I knew something had been there. Everything that I experienced that night is not recorded. I mean, I have no proof. I know that. No scratches, no bruises, no witnesses, just a memory and a newspaper that shouldn't have moved. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia. I wanted it to be paranoia. That would be easier, fixable, something I could take a pill for, talk to someone about. But I keep coming back to the paper. It moved against the airflow. It moved toward me. I left that house the next day. Didn't say much. Didn't want to make a big deal. I told myself I was just tired, overstimulated, spooked by coincidence. But now I'm home, and sometimes I wake up in the night with the same weight in the air, same invisible presence watching me from a corner I don't dare look into. It hasn't touched me again, but it doesn't feel gone either. And the worst part is that I'm still scared of the blanket. I check it every night now, make sure no part of it hangs over the side, just in case something decides to pull. Story number 9. I've seen shadows crawl along walls where no light could cast them. I've felt cold fingers wrap around my ankles while lying perfectly still. But none of that compares to what happened when I dared to talk about the unseen. Some say words carry power, that merely naming evil draws it near. I used to laugh at such ideas until I saw belief strike back. That night, something hurt us. Not just the walls or the wind, something intelligent, aware, angry. You think you're safe when you're talking theology with a friend on a couch. You think demons are just myths for medieval minds. But what if they aren't? What if they're simply listening? I'm writing this because I need to believe that by telling you, I'm not alone in this, that someone else has stared into that darkness and lived to speak of it. It was supposed to be just a regular night. Coffee, conversation, a sleepover at my friend Alyssa's penthouse apartment. She lives alone, nestled high above the street in this vintage building with its creaky floors and ornate ceilings. The kind of place that feels too quiet, too still. The walls seem to absorb sound rather than bounce it back. There's always this sensation, like the space is listening, not in the way you notice right away, more like something you feel when the conversation dies and the silence lingers just a second too long. We were talking about life, drifting through the usual subjects, careers, bad dates, family, dreams, and then we crossed that invisible threshold. Faith. I am a deep believer, I told her. I've seen enough to know the spiritual world is very, very real. Elisa leaned forward, curious. Like angels and demons real? I nodded. Especially demons. They hide in plain sight. They watch, they wait. And when you acknowledge them, that's when the room changed. I mean it. The air got heavier, like the pressure dropped. I looked toward the corner bookshelf, a tall, cluttered thing built into the wall, stuffed with old hardcovers and dusty paperbacks. And then a book just fell from the top shelf, loud, final. We both jumped. Elisa's eyes widened. Did that just fall on its own? See? That's exactly what happens when you call them by name. They don't like it and they try to scare you. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I was rattled. Cold. I refused to pick up the book. That felt like acknowledgement. Instead, I kept the conversation light, changed the subject, pretended everything was fine, but nothing felt fine. We didn't say the word demon again, not directly, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. Every creak in the wood made us flinch. Then came the second book, because it was almost like a response, like something saying, "I'm still here." This time, it didn't just fall, it launched. Not violently, but with intent. It slid off a shelf that shouldn't have had enough of a slope to do that. Elisa let out a sharp breath and bolted for the bathroom. I heard the water running. She was trying to wash away the fear. But I knew you can't wash off this kind of terror. I stood up. I was done pretending. "I know you're here," I said loudly. "And I don't fear you. I rebuke you. You have no place here." I don't know what I expected. A whisper, a breeze, a third book, nothing happened. But the room felt unsettled, like something unseen was pacing the floor. Elisa came back, shaking. "Please, don't leave me here alone tonight." I nodded. "I won't. But we need to pray." We didn't talk about demons anymore. We just sat, quiet, waiting for morning. At one point, I thought I saw a shape in the hallway, a tall, angular shadow that didn't belong, but it was gone when I turned. Later, I heard a sound at the door, not a knock, a press, like something was leaning its full weight against it from the outside. I didn't open it. I still wonder, had we not spoken about them, would they have shown up? Or were they always there, just waiting for the right invitation? This happened recently, and I just really still cannot wrap my head around it. It wasn't a dream, a prank, or some kind of an illusion. Multiple people witnessed it. In fact, both inside and outside of the door. And to this day, none of us can explain it. Story number 10. There's a kind of darkness that doesn't just hide what's behind it, it erases it. We stood when to face with that void. And I swear to you, something looked back. What if I told you that we opened a door and found nothing? But the people inside said the lights were still on. They were shouting for help just a meter away, but we heard them. They heard us. But when we opened the door, there was no one there, just black. You'd think reality is solid, that sound, sight, and space all line up. But this basement taught me that sometimes they don't. I've seen horror movies, I've heard ghost stories, but nothing prepared me for the moment the door opened and the world just glitched. It all started with a dare. We'd been house-sitting for a friend who had just bought a centuries-old colonial home on the edge of town. The kind with crooked floorboards, stained wallpaper, and a basement door that creaked even when you weren't touching it. The house practically dared you to explore it. And of course, someone eventually did. The basement was the topic of every conversation for days. People claimed to hear humming from down there at night. One guy swore he saw a shadow standing at the top of the stairs when he came out of the bathroom. That's the thing about places like this. They don't even need to do much. They breathe unease. So on a dare, 4 people decided to go down into the basement just before midnight. I wasn't one of them. I was upstairs with my friend Dylan, finishing our late dinner and joking about how cliché the whole scene felt. Then we heard them call out, but they weren't laughing. There was a panic in their voices. "We're stuck. The door won't open." I looked at Dylan. "Are they screwing with us?" He shrugged. "Only one way to find out." We went to the basement door. It was old, but looked like it had been opened 1,000 times without trouble. No lock, no resistance. But when I pressed on it, it didn't move, not even a centimeter. So I gave it a shoulder check. It made a loud thud, not a subtle sound, and my friend was right beside me the whole time. We opened the door slightly, maybe less than halfway, and what we saw behind that door made both of us stop cold. It was pitch black, no light at all, not dim, not shadowy, just pure blackness, like a void. The kind of black that looks like it's swallowing everything behind it. I froze. That wasn't normal darkness. It wasn't absence of light. It was presence. It was a thing, a living nothingness that sat just inches away. My whole body tightened, like my instincts were screaming, "Close it, shut it, walk away." But I couldn't move. And then came the whisper, not from the door, from my own mind. "You shouldn't be looking in here." I yanked the door shut. Dylan was already halfway down the hall. I didn't even realize he'd moved. The people inside said the lights were on the entire time. They were staring at the door as we opened it, but they said that they never saw it move, not even a little. No change in lighting, no shift, no opening, nothing. But we heard them, and they heard us, just like 2 people on either side of a window, except there was no window, no connection. They did, however, hear us approaching and hear us running away after we saw what was behind that door. It was like our realities had diverged, one in which the door was opened into an infinite blackness, another where it never opened at all. When they finally got out on their own hours later, they looked shaken, but not in the way you'd expect from a normal scare. They kept asking us questions we couldn't answer. "Why didn't you open the door all the way? Why did you run? Did you hear the singing? Wait, what?" They heard singing? None of us upstairs had heard anything like that. We stayed up until dawn trying to make sense of it. Every theory fell apart. Could it have been a blackout? But they said the lights were still on. Could the door have been jammed? But it opened fine later. Could someone have been messing with us? But we saw it, both of us, the void, and I haven't even told you the worst part. 2 days later, Dylan started having nosebleeds. Not just once, every night at exactly 11:57 p.m., which was the time we opened that door. The doctor said it was stress. But what causes stress from nothing? I started sleepwalking. One night, I woke up standing in front of my basement door at home. I don't even remember how I got there. Sometimes I swear I see something just beyond the edges of the dark. Not shapes, not face, just awareness. Something that noticed us when we noticed it. And I think it's still watching. I have told this story 100 times, and it never gets easier. Everyone always ask the same thing. Do you think it was a ghost? No. Ghosts are stories. Spirits are legends. What we saw felt mechanical, systemic, like we opened a rip in the software of our world. We still talk about this sometimes. And it wasn't just creepy. And it felt like we saw something that we weren't supposed to see, like a glitch or a thin spot in reality or something. That's the best way I can put it. A thin spot. A moment where our two versions of the world stopped syncing and slipped apart. If you've ever experienced something like that, where sound, sight, and space stop agreeing with each other, then I believe you, because we lived it and we still don't know what we saw. But something saw us. Story number 11. You ever look back at a moment and realize it could have been the last time someone saw you alive? That moment still haunts me. It started with something simple, a furniture pickup. But there was something about that ride I didn't take that saved my life. He wasn't a stranger. I'd used his truck service before. My husband had too. Reliable, quiet. And that's what scared me most. The passenger seat was taken this time. A woman, silent, watching. And suddenly the truck I once trusted felt like a trap. I almost got in. I was one step away from vanishing forever. But something in my gut screamed, no. And I listened. Opposites. You ever look back at a moment and realize it could have been the last time someone saw you alive? That moment still haunts me. It was just a casual weekday afternoon. I needed to grab some furniture someone left out before garbage day. Nothing weird about that. But I remember that sense, a quiet itch in the back of my skull, that something wasn't right. This wasn't my first time using this truck guy. A couple of years ago, I needed to pick up a Facebook Marketplace find, but I didn't have a car. Found this guy online with a reliable-looking ad. Need a pickup? Got a truck. He met me, helped me load the stuff up, and my house was just up the street. So I asked if he could give me a quick lift back, which he did. Seemed helpful, quiet, almost too quiet, but he got the job done. My husband used him a few times too, always polite, reliable, no complaints. He'd show up, load things, drive, unload, and leave. That was his routine. He's a super quiet guy. Never says much, and just sort of shows up and does the job and then leaves. We like that. No small talk, no drama. But this time was different. I texted him like always. Boozy, told him I had some stuff I wanted to pick up. He said sure, and offered to come the next day. He even asked if I needed a second person. I told him no. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He gave me the rate of $100, which I thought to be pretty reasonable, if not cheap. Considering that he had to drive almost an hour to get to where I am, fair price, normal communication, all seemed routine, except it wasn't. The next day, my husband was out of town. I walked down the street to the pickup spot alone. As I turned the corner, I saw his truck already there, same as always, but not quite. There was someone in the passenger seat, tinted window, couldn't make out who. A silhouette, maybe. Could have been nothing. But the second I saw it, my stomach tightened. I didn't ask for a second person. Why was there someone else? I circled around the truck casually, trying not to look too obvious. Got closer. Saw the passenger was a woman. But she just sat there. Didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even glance my way. He stepped out of the truck, smiling like everything was peachy. "Hey, how are you doing?" Way too cheery. That wasn't like him. And then before we have even started loading the furniture, he goes, "So, will you ride with me again today?" That question stopped me cold. My brain stalled. I blinked. I smiled awkwardly. "Oh, no, don't worry. It's just up the street." But he didn't let it go. He goes on to say that it's not a problem and I should just ride with him. He opened the back seat behind the woman, cleared space, like he'd already planned where I'd sit. Still, I didn't panic. Yet, we started loading the furniture. That's when the woman stepped out of the truck. Still didn't say a word, just started helping, like a ghost in denim. I sent a quick text to my husband. Something feels off. He's really pushing for me to get in his truck. He replied instantly, "Absolutely not. Do not do it. Send me the plate." As we loaded, I glanced at the license plate, memorized the digits, snuck a photo, sent it. Then, to avoid the awkwardness, I tossed a few items into the back seat, the same seat he'd cleared for me, trying to play it cool. But as soon as I did, they both jumped. "Oh, no, that's your seat. Don't do that." That was the first moment the alarm bells got loud in my head. I joked nervously, said something about walking to get my steps in, tried to brush it off, but they didn't let it go. When the truck was finally loaded, I told them I'd meet them at the drop-off spot. It was literally just up the street, 10-minute walk. But again, he insisted, No, we'll give you a ride. I'm good. Come on, just hop in." The back and forth kept going. The woman finally spoke. "Would you feel more comfortable if I sat in the back instead and you sat up front?" It wasn't kindness. It was strategy. I looked at her, then at him. My pulse was hammering in my ears. Something was wrong. Too much insistence. Too many little red flags. I blurted, "I'm not getting in the truck. I listen to way too much true crime. I'm not getting in your truck, okay? I don't feel comfortable." After I say this, they just kind of start laughing like it's a funny joke. "Yeah, of course. Yeah, we get it." But their smiles didn't reach their eyes. I walked fast. When I arrived at my place, the furniture had already been dumped on the lawn. She sat inside the truck, and he avoided eye contact. I'm like, "I'll send you the transfer." And he's back to being his quiet self. Then they leave in a hurry. No thank you, no goodbye, no invoice. As I stood alone on the porch, the wind whistled through the half-loaded furniture, and I kept replaying it all. Every sentence, every look, every moment. I had fully planned on getting on that truck. That's the truth. My husband and I even talked the night before. Yeah, he'll probably offer a ride again, which will be helpful. If he'd acted normal, if he'd just introduced the woman or made a casual excuse, I would have gotten in too. No doubt. That thought chills me even now. You see, the scary thing is that if he had not acted so different right from the beginning, if he hadn't made such a big deal about where I sat, if she had just smiled, said hi, If they hadn't pushed so hard, I would have gotten in that truck. But they didn't play it cool, and that's what saved me. I think about all the ways it could have gone. How easy it is to disappear when no one's watching. When someone you once trusted turns silent. And when your gut whispers, but you ignore it. That day, I listened, because I remembered something I heard in a podcast once. A mantra burned into the back of my mind. Be weird, be rude, stay alive. Story number 12. People often think danger comes loud, with sirens, shouting, or screaming terrors. But the most terrifying things, they creep in silently, wait patiently, and then disappear just as quietly, leaving behind only your racing heartbeat and 1,000 unanswered questions. I've worked late plenty of times, closed up the shop, locked the doors, and walked the same route home more nights than I can count. Nothing ever happened until one night. Something did. It started with the unmistakable growl of an engine, a low, deep rev that shattered the silence of our tiny farming village. And then a black SUV appeared from nowhere, sliding to a stop in the one blind spot our ancient CCTV system couldn't see. What struck me immediately wasn't the car. It was the silence after. No one got out. No one rolled down a window. It just sat there, idling like it was, watching, waiting. If I had crossed that road, if I had kept walking, I honestly don't know if I'd be here to tell you this. And that thought still makes my skin crawl. So this happened like 6 to 7-ish years ago, when I was working as a supervisor at an off-lick license in a pretty small farming village in the middle of nowhere. It's a little past 10 p.m. Closing time. My coworker B has finished up all of our jobs, packed everything that needed to be packed away. The alarm is set. We're outside and my key is in the motor to bring the shutter down when all of a sudden, we both jump at the sound of a loud car engine revving to life. The sudden roar wasn't normal, not for our sleepy village where the loudest sound past 9 p.m. was usually a fox rummaging in someone's bins. My fingers froze on the shutter key. My eyes snapped toward the corner where the sound came from. Not a second later, as the shutter meets the pavement, the offending car comes barreling around the corner and pulls up abruptly about 15 feet away, conveniently pulling up to the blind spot of the store's prehistoric CCTV cameras. I might add, no headlights, just the black silhouette of a modern SUV, sleek, shining, like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Not a speck of mud, dust, or even a fingerprint. Around here, farmers drive vehicles that wear their labor like a badge. This was something else entirely. Now, I'm pretty dense about cars, so I couldn't tell you what make or model it was, but whatever it was nice. Maybe a Jeep or a Land Rover or something. The kind isn't really uncommon in the area. As I said, we're a farming village, but normally you can tell when they belong to a farmer because they're caked up in mud and dust and all that. The longer it idled, the less it felt like a coincidence. Why park in a dead zone? Why linger with the engine still on? That kind of vehicle isn't subtle. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to be discreet, but they were deliberate. This thing, though, was a new car, level, kind of shiny, pitch black with matching tinted windows. It's a speculation because, as I mentioned, I don't know anything about cars, but I'm sure that the windows were tinted past legal levels. I mean, we couldn't see inside at all. There's something uniquely disturbing about not being able to see someone who can see you. Every second the SUV sat there, the tension thickened like fog. B and I stood there pretending to chat, trying to act normal. But it was a performance. Our eyes flicked back to the vehicle again and again. Whatever the case, the driver just sits there, engine still on, seemingly not going anywhere, as B and I chat between ourselves, both unconsciously stalling, waiting for whatever this is to move along. But we seem to be in a stalemate because nobody moves for at least 5 minutes now. You start imagining things. Is this some rich outsider who got lost? A drunk local who doesn't know where he is? Or something worse? B's older than me, and I went to school with her kids, and I can tell mom mode is activated by the way that she's eyeing the car off and all that, and how she offers to drive me home that night, too. She's parked further up the road, so we wouldn't have to pass the stranger's car to get to it. I lived with my parents at the other end of the road, about a 2 or 3 minute walk, but I would have had to have passed the stranger's to get there for sure. Her voice was casual when she offered, but the way her hand subtly gripped her keys tighter told a different story. She was ready to bolt. She'd sensed something I hadn't yet fully processed. Now, still in my naivety, or maybe just stubborn independence, I declined. I told her I'd walk. I didn't want to inconvenience her. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Even though my nerves are on edge, I'm not ready to assume the worst, and I don't want to put her out as she lives in a different direction totally. So, I sort of declined. Yeah, I know I would die first in a horror movie, but whatever. I'm content to just cross the pavement on the other side to put a little bit of distance between us, and I could leg it if I needed to. But fate, or something else, intervened, just as I approached the edge of the pavement to start crossing. Some guy jumps out of the back seat on the side, facing where I was about to cross to, leaving the door open. That moment stretched like taffy. The door creaked. The man stepped out, deliberately slow, not rushed, not surprised to see us, as if we were part of his plan. He's not masked or wearing dark clothes or anything to that effect, but he's wearing a cap and keeping his head down, so I cannot make out his facial features. From what I can see, though, he's white, easily 6 foot, and I wouldn't say big, but fit enough that he could take B or myself, who are both closer to like 5 foot, and certainly not in the best shape of our respective lives. His steps were casual, but too casual. The kind of calm that made you feel like he was in control. Immediately, I start backing up, even more unnerved, and as if sensing my suspicion, he lights up a cigarette, acting nonchalant, but at the same time starts rounding the back of the car, joining B and I back on our side of the road. But for maybe 10 feet of distance, the air around us felt like static. Every part of me was screaming to move. Actually, if the offer still stands, I would like a lift home after all, I say to B. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and unlocked her car, and I can tell that she's relieved by my change of heart. We speed walk to her car, neither of us taking our eyes off of the other vehicle and its passenger for even more than a second. Once inside the car, we didn't speak, only moved. B's hands trembled slightly as she jammed the key into the ignition. I pulled out my phone with one thought in mind: get the plate. As soon as we're seated in her dinky little two-door, I pull out my phone, planning on taking a photo of the license plate. Bea has a similar thought, and she's rummaging in her glove box for a notepad. But the moment we looked back up, it was too late. The guy who had gotten out climbs back into the back seat, and the car speeds off into the night, leaving a half-smoked cigarette in its wake. Gone, just like that. No faces, no names, no plate. Just silence again. We sat in her car for a long time after that, engine running, just breathing. Neither of us could say exactly what had just happened, but we both knew it wasn't nothing. For weeks, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. What if I'd walked just 10 seconds sooner? What if I hadn't stopped when I saw him? Was it a planned robbery or something far darker? One theory that gnawed at me came from Bea's sister, who used to be a paramedic. She said the SUV fit the exact type used in a string of disappearances from the outskirts of nearby counties. Same model, same black tint, same method of lurking. None of those victims were ever found. Then there was my mother's theory. The scariest theory goes to my mother, though, who watches a lot of true crime and is certain that she could have been a police detective if not for her criminal record. She's convinced that it was a planned kidnapping specifically for me. And you know what? As crazy as it sounded, it made sense. Her evidence being the lack of proper face coverings and the fact that they were parked in the camera's blind spots. There were more cameras in the building that they couldn't have avoided if they wanted to go in and rob the place. And then came the final nail, the idea I still can't shake. The car's back door being left open was another one, and it would have made it a lot easier for them to force me inside as I walked by it. And finally, I always take the same short route to and from work for convenience, so maybe they were scoping me out for some time. I quit 2 weeks later. Bea made sure her husband walked her to the car every night after that. My stepdad drove me to every shift until my last. None of us talked about it again. Not out loud, anyway. But every time I pass a black SUV on a country road, I feel it again. The hum in my bones. The near miss I can't explain. Somewhere out there, someone might still be watching. Or maybe they're just waiting. Story number 13. You ever been deep in the woods, far from cell signals, far from civilization, with people who are half playing and half living a fantasy? That's where I was, where the line between game and reality blurred into something far more dangerous. There's a specific kind of fear when you're surrounded by trees, the moon barely a sliver above, and someone's watching you, not in character, not for fun, but with something dark behind their eyes. We all go to LARP events for the story, for the role play, for the friendships. But what happens when someone shows up who doesn't care about the rules? What happens when the villain isn't wearing a costume? I thought I understood the risks of camping, wild animals, bad weather. But I never imagined my scariest night would come from another human, one who couldn't tell the game from real life. His name was Greg, and I still regret not walking away the moment I saw him, because that single mistake nearly cost me everything. So, I'm into laping. And for those who don't know what that is, we basically spend the weekend in the woods dressed as medieval fantasy characters and interact with each other. It's our escape. No phones, no modern slang, no real-world talk, just swords, quests, and the kind of immersion that makes you forget you're a barista or software dev in real life. I usually come with my partner and a close friend. The three of us have this tradition. Choose a faction, camp by the lake, and play our roles hard. Now, there are all types of people at these events, but 99.9% are absolute angels. I had yet to meet the 0.1%, but man, do I wish that I hadn't. We arrived Friday afternoon. The woods were peaceful, birds chirping, air thick with pine. I was setting up our main tent when a stranger wandered down the trail. I noticed him before he spoke, disheveled, heavy-set, a strange gleam in his eye that didn't match the joy or curiosity you usually see at LARP events. Before the event started, a guy named Greg swung by my tent while I was setting it up, but he said hi, awkwardly. His tone wasn't friendly, it was too eager, too interested. He looked around, then asked if I was alone. I said no, vaguely, keeping my voice even. He chuckled and launched into a one-sided conversation about a video game, Ark: Survival Evolved, which, to be fair, I knew incredibly well. But everything he said was wrong. Incorrect dinosaur names, mechanics that didn't exist. Like he had watched one YouTube video and decided he was an expert. Every time I corrected him, his eyes he narrowed. The way some people get when you bruise their ego. I wrapped up the conversation quickly. I should finish this before nightfall, I said. He walked away without another word. That evening, the in-game events began. Everyone was in character. We wore leather armor, capes, face paint. We sat around a fire playing a riddle game. Then Greg reappeared, uninvited, and sat directly next to me. I shifted away. He followed. I shifted again. He moved closer. I finally got up and sat beside my friend. He made no effort to stay in character. Everything he said referenced the real world. Cars, YouTubers, his favorite Twitch streamers. So, we tell him either to leave or to make an effort and speak properly. And he chooses to leave. But the discomfort lingered. The next morning, I went on a solo quest to gather herbs, part of the game. Just me, my foam bow, and a basket for collecting potions. The woods were silent, a little too sad. As I headed back to the main camp, Greg stood right in the middle of the trail. He grinned. He asked me to grab coffee sometime. No thanks, dear, I said politely. I'm collecting herbs, I added. Need to drop this off back at the village. I turned and began walking fast. He kept up. Then suddenly, his hand on my arm. You, me, alone in the woods looking for plants. That's like the perfect scenario. I jerked away. This wasn't a game anymore. I rushed down the trail. My heart was pounding. My legs moved on autopilot. I spotted some of my camp neighbors. They'd noticed something was off. That's when I used the emergency phrase we'd all agreed on. I'd tell them in an honesty way, which is a code to say, take me seriously. This isn't part of the game. Instantly, they stood up, grabbed their foam swords, and confronted Greg. Leave, one of them barked, or you'll be facing more than goblins. Greg didn't fight it. he slunk off. I stuck close to the group for the rest of the day. By midnight, the camp was alive with battles and laughter. I had started to relax again, maybe even laugh a little. I excused myself to the bathroom. The trail was pitch black, not a lantern in sight. Then a rustle, movement. He jumped from the bushes. He slammed me against a tree. His face was inches from mine. He reeked of sweat and something sour. All of a sudden, he tells me that he's not proud of me, that I've been leading him on. He accused me of hugging other guys, holding someone's hand, not his. I told him flatly that was my fiancée. And my friends, he wasn't either. He didn't like that answer. But what if, in all honesty, I just want a little kiss? I screamed and shoved him. My friends were on the other side of the bridge. They heard me. And when I screamed, they came running, weapons drawn, voices shouting. Greg backed off fast. I was interrogating her, he claimed. For demon knowledge, no one bought it. They surrounded him, told him not to move. Someone ran to get the camp owner. I'm taken away by my fiancée, who was very worried and concerned about what had happened. I couldn't stop shaking. My brain still couldn't believe that this had escalated so far. The owner of the event came within minutes. He listened. He didn't question me, didn't ask if I was exaggerating. He escorted Greg off-site. From what I heard later, Greg was banned from all future events, permanently. Story number 14. I had always believed that silence was safe until I heard someone breathing in it. Curtains don't block out fear. They only delay your confrontation with it. There was no wind, no pets, no people. Yet something was panting behind my bed. They say your home is your sanctuary. Mine became a stage for something invisible. That night, I realized the scariest things aren't what you see, it's what you hear when you're alone. I live alone in a studio, and to make it feel bigger, I separate the end of my mattress that isn't facing the wall with a big tapestry, sort of like a hospital curtain, I guess. The space is mine, quiet, sparse, and structured in a way that comforts me. No doors between bed and bathroom, no hallway to the front door, just a soft division, my fabric wall. That night felt normal. I was scrolling on my phone, trying to tire my eyes. The lights had been off for about 20 minutes when I first heard it, a low, rhythmic sound. Not the building, not pipes, not even footsteps. It was panting, deliberate, wet, invasive. It reminded me of how a dog might sound when sniffing aggressively into a jar. But I didn't own a dog. I didn't own anything that could make that sound. I froze. My thumb hovered over the flashlight button on my phone. Not because I was afraid of what I might see, but because I was afraid of confirming that something was there to be seen. I turned on my flashlight without getting up first and angled it toward the tapestry. The soft beam made the curtain glow, but it didn't show a shadow. I whispered into the silence, "Get out." Nothing changed. Or, "Get out." Or, the panting continued, slower, dragged, as if whatever it was had become aware I was listening now. It was breathing slower. for me. Then the shifting started. Light steps. No. Skittering, like something on all fours retreating, but not running, just relocating into the shadows beyond my line of sight, into the kitchen, into the bathroom, where the light didn't reach. I remained in bed longer than I'd like to admit. Every time I moved, I imagined alerting it. Every creak of the floorboards under me felt like an invitation. Eventually, adrenaline overruled caution. I stood up fast, hit the main switch. Light exploded across the room, and everything stopped. I got up and turned on the lights, and it all just sort of stopped. No movement, no panting, no shifting. Just me, alone, or at least that's what it looked like. There was nothing out of place. Nothing was there. Nothing was out of place. I couldn't see any pests around or anything. I opened cabinets, checked under the sink. I even pulled the tapestry aside and ran my hand along the wall. Nothing. Nothing but air and doubt. I checked the windows. Locked. My door. Deadbolt still clicked. I stood in the center of my studio and listened. For nearly 10 minutes, a refrigerator hum, the occasional settling creak, but no breath. But I definitely slept with the lights on that night, to say the least. And I still do. The tapestry is gone now. The false barrier taken down. I thought removing it would help me feel more in control, more aware. But every so often, late at night, when I turn off my music early, I swear I can hear it again. That breathing, that waiting, just behind where the curtain used to be. Story number 10. I used to believe that nature heals you, that the rainforest hums with life and peace. But I've learned that some forests hold their breath. And watch. My birthday was supposed to be a retreat. Instead, it became the one night we stopped believing in coincidences and started fearing silence. My husband and I never talked about it. Not really. But we both saw her, the same figure, same place, same twisted grin. You think dreams can't hurt you until you wake up and someone else saw what you dreamed? Obskmit. We left with the sunrise, not because of what we heard, but because of what we didn't. We live in Australia, and years ago, before the chaos of parenthood, my husband surprised me with a birthday getaway. He'd booked a rustic little cabin deep in the rainforest, about 2 hours' drive from where we lived. It was a modest one-bedroom Airbnb tucked close to the host's house, vintage in style, with no Wi-Fi, no TV, no distractions. The rainforest itself was ancient, heritage listed primeval, a living cathedral of green. We spent the first day wandering by creeks and mossy trees, letting the silence soak into us. There was something oddly still about the place. Beautiful, yeah, but too quiet at times. That first night we cooked, read books by candlelight, and fell asleep to the chorus of frogs and nightbirds. It was everything I thought I needed, a chit. But the next night was different. The air was too still. No rustling, no buzzing, no chirping. The forest, for all its density, had gone mute. I remember saying aloud, "It's weirdly quiet tonight." He just nodded. We brushed it off. That was a mistake. That night, I had a dream so vivid it didn't feel like a dream at all. I was lying in bed. At the foot stood a hideous old woman, gaunt and draped in a tattered nightgown. Her eyes, milky white, were locked on mine, and her grin was stretched unnaturally wide. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in that terrible dream state where your body won't respond, but your soul is screaming. Then she reached toward me with crooked hands, fingers clawed, mouth twitching. And I woke up, gasping for breath, drenched in cold sweat. But I wasn't the only one awake. My husband was already sitting upright, staring at the foot of the bed, his skin pale, mouth slightly open, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. I asked him, "Are you okay?" He nodded, but didn't answer. We left the bathroom light on that night. Neither of us slept a wink. We never spoke about it until the drive home. As the highway curved back toward civilization, I finally asked, "Why were you awake last night?" He didn't answer at first. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Then he said, "I felt like something was standing at the end of the bed, just watching us all night." I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. "And what do you think it was?" I whispered. He glanced at me, his face pale. "I thought I saw, I don't know, this vague shadow of an old woman, just standing there." I stared at him, chills crawling up my spine. Then I told him my dream, every detail. He didn't say a word after that, just kept driving. We never stayed in another cabin again, even now, years later. We refer to it as our haunted cabin holiday. And still, we never really talk about her. What disturbs me most isn't the vision or the dream. It's that he saw her too, without me saying a word. How could two people hallucinate the exact same entity? Why would she come to us, two strangers in her woods? We weren't trespassing. We were invited. But maybe the invitation wasn't from the hosts. Maybe she was just waiting for someone to notice her silence. Story number 16. You'd think after 2 years I'd be used to the creaks of this place, but what do you do when it starts whispering back? Our lights have begun flipping themselves off, not flickering, flipping. Like someone's fingers are still in the room. It happened right in front of both of us. 1 second the light was on, the next, darkness. And no one touched the switch. My husband won't admit it, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He tried to joke, but his hands were shaking. I'm 10 weeks pregnant, and something in this house knows that. I can feel it breathing behind the walls. We moved into this manufactured home 2 years ago, parked right on a stretch of land that's been in my husband's family for generations. Quiet, isolated, and simple, exactly what we needed to start fresh with our 2 kids. But lately, I've felt watched. So, we've lived in the same new mobile home, manufactured trailer house for 2 years on land that my husband's family has owned for almost 100 years. And well, lately, weird things have been happening. At first, it was small, the feeling of a breeze despite shut windows, the sense that someone was walking behind me when I knew I was alone. But I brushed it off. Pregnancy hormones, I told myself, sleep deprivation. But then the lights began to turn off by themselves. The other day, my husband and I were talking as I was walking out of our bedroom. The light was on, and he was walking inside of it. Then he said my name in a slightly sort of concerning tone. I turned around and said, "What?" But the light was suddenly off. He asked if I had flipped the switch. I hadn't. He hadn't either. Our 6-year-old was in the living room. Our toddler can't even reach the switch. We looked at each other. Not scared, not yet. Just confused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was curled up on the couch past midnight, scrolling endlessly through baby name forums. The house was still. No sound but the occasional hum from the fridge. Then I heard it. Click! The sound of a light switch. Not a creak, not a flicker. A solid, deliberate click. I looked up and saw the hallway bathroom light, usually glowing dim for our eldest, was off. My heart thumped, sharp and immediate. I waited, then I hear it again. The flip of a switch, and the light cuts on it. There was no one there. I didn't tell my husband. He's 6'2" and 240 pounds. But he jumps at thunder. And he'd been sleeping better lately. I didn't want to mess that up. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was changing in this house. It's hard to explain, but I feel it near me, especially at night, like a warmth that shouldn't be there. A heaviness pressing against my chest as I try to fall asleep. Last Thursday, I thought I heard whispering down the hallway. It was soft, like fabric dragging across the floor. I walked out of our room, and the hallway light was blinking again, on, off, then dead silent. The baby inside me kicked hard. Startled, I placed my hand over my belly. Was it reacting to something I couldn't see? This wasn't how things were when I carried our firstborn. Or maybe it was. With my first pregnancy, I always felt like someone was always watching us, or would hear footsteps walking down the hall of our old home. I had nightmares of someone snatching my husband away. The timing haunted me. During that pregnancy, his mother passed away. She loved her family fiercely. Maybe, just maybe, I began noticing patterns. The light only turned off when I was alone or when I spoke about the baby. It was almost as if someone or something was reacting. Our daughter drew a picture yesterday. A woman in the hallway with long dark hair and no face. When I asked who it was, she just shrugged. She's always there when I wake up. I finally confronted my husband, told him everything. He didn't laugh. Instead, he walked over to the bedroom switch, flipped it on, then off. He held his hand there, trembling. "Hey, it's not the switch," he whispered. "It's the cold." That night, we slept with every light on. Story number 70. I was just fumbling with the aux cord when the woman started screaming through my car speakers. It wasn't just sound. It was agony, fear, like someone was being dragged to hell in real time. The voice wasn't supposed to be there. The caller was our friend, but the voice wasn't hers. We thought she was being murdered, but when the line reconnected, she just asked for the door code. Then came the ambulance. No sirens before, just quiet. And then wailing down the road we'd just passed. We were headed up to a secluded cabin in the Smokies, a 10-person escape from real life. A little mountain retreat for grown-ups who wanted to drink bourbon, laugh too loud, and maybe spot a bear from a safe distance. My wife and I were in the second car, following a group of friends in another vehicle. I remember it clearly because we had the windows cracked, the air crisp and cool, the playlist low and nostalgic. Nothing felt out of place. Yet, we took 2 cars, me, A, my husband, M, L, and J, and mine, and Z, E, D, and C in the other. Z, E, D, and C left ahead of us, and we traveled behind. The plan was to meet for dinner before checking into the cabin, but our timing got scattered. The last couple, Y and her husband, were running behind with their kids, so we figured they'd just catch up later. I was driving, glancing at the GPS, laughing along with L, who had just made a comment about how eerie the mountain fog looked when the phone rang. The caller ID said, "Why?" I tapped the screen to pick it up, expecting her usual chirpy voice asking if we could grab something for the kids or to tell us they were just a few miles out. But the moment the call connected, our world tilted, and all of a sudden, we hear a woman screaming, crying, and pleading. "No, stop, don't do this." It wasn't muffled or distant. It was right there, piercing through the speakers like she was sitting in the back seat, being torn apart. There were other sounds, chaotic ones, scraping, sobbing, something slamming. Everyone in the car froze. No one spoke. We didn't blink. I slammed the brakes without realizing it. Then the screaming cuts off like the call just ended. Dead silence. My hands were shaking, fumbling to redial. M was yelling her name. L was leaning forward, staring at the phone like it might bite. Then the call reconnected. "Hey guys," came Y's voice, calm, chipper even. "We just made it to the cabin. What's the door code again?" We sat in total disbelief. "You made it just now?" I stammered. "Yeah, we're parked outside," she replied, puzzled. "The kids are asleep. What's up?" L was the first to speak up, his voice tight. "We just heard screaming on your call, like someone being attacked." "What? No, we just got here. Haven't even gone inside. Everything's fine." We explained to her that we had just heard crying and screaming, and we thought that she was getting murdered or attacked. She was confused. Her husband got on the line and insisted they were okay. Even the kids were calm, munching on snacks in the back seat. We gave them the door code and ended the call, but the air inside our car stayed thick, like it had been polluted with something foul and invisible. And then, as if summoned by the darkness, an ambulance blazed past us, lights on, no siren, headed in the opposite direction, back toward where we had just driven. No one spoke for the rest of the ride. That night, after unpacking and pretending everything was normal, I sat on the back porch alone, staring into the black forest, thinking about how real that scream had been. It wasn't a prank. Why wasn't that kind of person? What had we heard? The next day, I called my filter provider. I told them something strange had happened on a call the night before. I asked if there had been any signal interference. "Maybe," I said. "The call got crossed with someone else's line, Maybe we heard someone in danger and not our friend. The rep on the phone said it was impossible. Calls are encrypted, he explained. You wouldn't hear someone else's call like that, not in 20. I hung up, more disturbed than before. That night we played games, grilled steaks, told scary stories around the fire. But none of it landed. Every time someone laughed too loud or a branch snapped in the woods, my brain went back to that scream, the texture of it, the desperation. Later, while walking back from the hot tub alone, I saw something between the trees, just a flash, maybe like a pale face, half lit by moonlight, gone before I could process it. I didn't say anything, didn't want to scare the others. But the forest around Gatlinburg, it holds things, sounds, echoes. Maybe it held that scream, too. 3 weeks after we got home, I got a call from Y. You remember that night? She asked. When I called you from the cabin, I felt a chill immediately. How could I forget? She hesitated. My son, he's been drawing things, dark things. A woman with her mouth wide open, a cabin on fire. He says he saw it in a dream. That night, I went silent. He says she was in the woods, she continued, and she was looking for help. But no one could hear her. I didn't know what to say. Every hair on my body was standing upright. And the weirdest part, she added, he says she screamed into a phone, hoping someone would hear her. Some things follow you home. That call never showed up on my call log. I even checked with my carrier again. The timestamp exists, but there's no audio data, just dead air. I still have the car. Every once in a while, when I plug my phone in, the Bluetooth crackles just for a second. A hiss, a breath, a distant sob. It sounded too real. And Y has never been one to play games like that. So was it just a fluke? A glitch in the tower? A cry from someone trapped on a parallel signal? Or had we been the only ones to hear a soul slip through? We'll never know. But every time I drive through Gatlinburg, I keep the windows up and the phone off